They sent her to die, not with a blade. That would have been mercy. They dressed it up as diplomacy, handed her a silver tribute laced with poison, and watched her walk into frozen hell with a smile that said, "Good riddance." Alara Vance knew what she was: the unwanted daughter of a traitor, a wolfless disgrace, a political sacrifice wrapped in a treaty scroll. King Roderick didn't even pretend otherwise. But here's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. You learn to see what others miss, and what Alara saw in the Obsidian Frontier would burn the kingdom to ash. Stay with me until the end. Drop a comment with your city. Hit that like button. You won't believe where this goes. The throne room stank of old wine and older lies. Alara stood before King Roderick with her hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white, listening to him explain why she was about to be fed to wolves. Literally. The marble floor reflected distorted versions of the court. Nobles in silk who wouldn't piss on her if she caught fire. Guards who looked through her like she was glass. Advisors whispering behind jeweled hands. Nobody here gave a damn if she lived or died. Most were probably hoping for the latter. She'd known this was coming. Had felt it in the air for weeks, the way you feel a storm building before the first drop of rain. The whispers got quieter when she walked past. The servants started avoiding her eyes. Lord Brennan, the king's chief vulture, had smiled at her 3 days ago. Actually smiled. And that's when she knew something terrible was on its way. You understand the honor being bestowed upon you. Roderick's voice carried the exact tone of a man describing garbage collection. He sat sprawled across his throne like a drunk spider, crown askew, one ring-heavy hand dangling over the armrest. 53 years old, and every single one of them had been a masterclass in cruelty dressed up as governance. Alara kept her face blank. 6 years of practice made it easy. "I understand, Your Majesty." "Do you?" His smile was a knife wrapped in velvet, the kind of smile that said he knew she knew, and he enjoyed it. "You will carry our peace offering to Alpha Kale Veric of the Obsidian Frontier. The silver tribute, personally selected by our treasury, demonstrates our commitment to ending this unfortunate border conflict. Unfortunate. That's what he called 3 years of skirmishes that left farming villages burning and widows begging in the streets. Unfortunate, like a bad harvest or a late spring. Not the calculated land grab it actually was, Roderick pushing north, testing boundaries, seeing how much territory he could steal before the frontier pushed back hard enough to matter. "The treaty terms are generous," Roderick continued, gesturing lazily toward the scroll case gripped in Alara's other hand. Ornate thing, all gold filigree and red leather, probably worth more than she'd seen in the last year. "You will deliver them, negotiate in good faith, and return with his mark of acceptance. Simple diplomacy." Every word was performance. Everyone in this room knew she wasn't coming back. The nobles watched like spectators at an execution, because that's what this was, just slower and further away. Lady Corinth, draped in emeralds that probably came from Alara's family estate, was practically glowing with satisfaction. Lord Hastings looked bored. The younger courtiers weren't even pretending to pay attention, already whispering about tonight's festivities. Alara had grown up with these people, played with them as children, back when her family name meant something, back when her father was Lord Marcus Vance, trusted advisor, decorated war hero, a man whose word carried weight in the kingdom. Then came the treason charges, the trial that lasted 3 hours, the execution that lasted 3 minutes. She'd been 14. Lord Brennan stepped forward now, his robe swishing with that particular rustle of expensive fabric. He had the satisfied expression of a man who'd just won a bet. "Given your unique position, Lady Vance, this assignment offers you an opportunity to restore some small measure of honor to your family name." There it was. The polite way of saying your father was a traitor and you're lucky we let you breathe. Alara's jaw clenched. She forced it to relax. Forced her voice to stay level, neutral, the perfect tone of gracious acceptance. "I am honored by His Majesty's trust." A few nobles actually laughed at that. Not loud, they had too much breeding for that, but those soft, knowing chuckles that said they all got the joke. Roderick's eyes gleamed. He knew she wasn't honored. He knew she knew this was execution dressed as diplomacy. But the game required both of them to pretend, and pretending was the only power she had left. "You depart at dawn," Brennan said, clearly enjoying himself now. 6 guards will escort you to the border. After that, he shrugged, the gesture saying everything his words didn't. After that, you're on your own in territory that eats Southerners for breakfast. The Obsidian Frontier is, of course, a challenging environment, Brennan continued, like he was describing a particularly difficult garden. Alpha Veric has a reputation, but I'm certain your diplomatic skills will serve you well. Diplomatic skills? She'd never been trained as a diplomat. Never been trained as anything official, actually. After her father's execution, all formal education stopped. No tutors, no courtly instruction, no preparation for any kind of useful role. She taught herself, stealing into the library at odd hours, bribing servants for books, learning languages from a retired translator who took pity on her. Nobody knew about any of that. They thought she was just taking up space, a ghost haunting the castle because Roderick found it amusing to keep her around. A living reminder of what happened to families who crossed him. The truth was more complicated. Elara had spent 6 years becoming invisible while simultaneously watching everything. She knew which nobles were embezzling from the treasury, knew which marriages were failing, knew which advisors were selling information to rival kingdoms, knew the patrol schedules, the servant rotations, the hidden passages that honeycombed the castle like veins in a body. Being underestimated was a strategy. Being forgotten was armor. Until now. I will not fail His Majesty, Elara said, each word carefully measured. Roderick waved a hand, already bored. See that you don't. Dismissed. Elara bowed, not too deep, just enough to satisfy protocol, and turned toward the massive oak doors. The walk across that throne room felt like miles. Every eye tracked her. Some pitying, most satisfied, a few openly gleeful. She kept her spine straight, her pace measured. Gave them nothing. The doors closed behind her with a boom that echoed like a coffin lid. Only then did she let herself breathe. The corridor outside was empty except for 2 guards who didn't even glance her direction. Elara walked quickly, keeping her footsteps quiet out of habit. The castle was a maze if you didn't know it, but she'd spent 6 years mapping every inch. Knew which floors creaked, which corners the guards avoided, which servants could be trusted, and which reported everything back to Brennan. Her room was in the east wing, in what used to be servant quarters before they converted it to house the disgraced. Small rooms with small windows, tucked away where important people didn't have to see them. Elara's was barely larger than a closet, bed, desk, wardrobe, and about 3 feet of floor space. The window looked out on the kitchen gardens, gray and dead in winter. She sat on the bed and stared at the treaty scroll. The case was beautiful, clearly expensive, the kind of thing you gave to someone important, the kind of thing you used to make a lie look legitimate. Elara turned it over in her hands, examining the seal. Roderick's mark in red wax, unbroken. She wasn't supposed to open it. Diplomatic protocols were clear about that. But since when had protocols protected her? She broke the seal. The scroll inside was actually pretty standard. Terms of peace between the southern kingdoms and the Obsidian Frontier. Promises of trade, respect for borders, mutual defense pacts. The language was formal but reasonable. Nothing obviously dangerous, which meant the danger was somewhere else. Elara set the scroll aside and stared at the empty case. Thought about Brennan's smile, about Roderick's casual cruelty, about the way they'd all looked at her, like a problem solving itself. They wanted her dead. That was obvious. But why this way? Why not just execute her quietly, stage an accident? She was worthless to them, politically irrelevant. Killing her would be easy, unless her death served a purpose. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, already knowing who it was. The door opened to reveal Captain Garrett, the man assigned to lead her escort. Thick-necked, scarred, with the kind of face that looked mean even when he was sleeping. His armor was decent, but not great. Functional rather than impressive. Not the king's elite. Not even close. "Lady Vance." He didn't bow, didn't even pretend respect. "Wanted to go over tomorrow's arrangements." "Of course." He stepped inside, filling the small room with his presence. Smelled like leather and old sweat. "We leave at first light. 1 bag, no more than 20 pounds. Weather's bad and we're moving fast." "Understood." "The silver tribute weighs 200 pounds, he continued, and there was something in his voice now, something that might have been amusement or might have been cruelty. "You'll be responsible for transporting it." Elara blinked. "I'm sorry? You heard me clear enough." Garrett's smile showed too many teeth. It's your assignment, your responsibility. My men and I are your escort, not your servants. You want that silver to reach Veric, you'll be the one carrying it. 200 pounds of silver across mountain terrain in winter, through territory known for killing travelers, with guards who clearly had no intention of helping. That seems impractical, Alara said carefully. Impractical, Garrett laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. That's a fancy word for it. Here's the thing, Princess. Nobody expects you to actually make it. This whole mission is theater. You show up at the border, realize how fucked you are, and either turn back or die trying. Either way, the king gets to say he tried diplomacy. At least he was honest about it. I'll manage, Alara said. Sure you will. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. The silver's being delivered tonight. You'll want to inspect it, make sure everything's secure. Can't have you blaming us when shit falls apart. Then he was gone, leaving Alara alone with the growing certainty that she was missing something critical. Shat. They delivered the tribute at sunset. 4 men, struggling under the weight of a massive chest bound with iron and sealed with the king's mark. They set it down in her tiny room with obvious relief, nearly taking out her desk in the process. Sign here, one of them grunted, shoving a ledger at her. Alara signed. They left without a word. She stared at the chest for a long moment. It was ornate, too ornate for simple tribute, carved with symbols of prosperity and peace, reinforced with bands of iron, locked with a mechanism that looked more decorative than secure. 200 pounds of silver. Enough to fund a small army. Enough to make real peace if peace was what Roderick actually wanted. But Roderick never did anything simple, never gave anything without strings attached. Alara knelt beside the chest, examining the lock. It was complex looking, but not actually difficult. She'd picked worse during her library raids. She pulled a hairpin from her braid, worked it into the mechanism, felt the tumblers shift and give. Click. The lid opened with a groan of hinges. Silver gleamed in the fading light. Bars stamped with Roderick's seal, stacked neat and perfect. Each one probably worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. Payment for peace. A king's ransom in precious metal. It looked legitimate. Looked exactly like what a peace offering should look like. Alara lifted 1 bar, testing its weight. Heavy, but not impossible. She could probably carry 2 at a time, maybe 3 if she was desperate. She set it down, reaching for another. Her fingers brushed something that felt wrong. Not the smooth coolness of silver. Something else. Rougher. Grittier. Alara pulled the top layer of bars aside, revealing what was underneath, dark powder. Packed tight between the silver bars, filling the spaces, coating everything. At first she thought it was just packing material, something to prevent the metal from shifting during transport. Then she smelled it, metallic, bitter. Wrong in a way that made her stomach turn. Her hands started trembling. She knew that smell. Had smelled it once before years ago when her father was treating a wounded soldier. The man had been poisoned, dying slowly, and Marcus Vance had shown her the substance responsible. Wolfsbane. Alara jerked her hands back, heart hammering, stared at the chest like it might bite her. This wasn't packing material. This was weapon-grade poison. Concentrated, refined, deadly. Mixed with the silver, coating the bars. Designed to contaminate everything it touched. And she'd been handling it with bare hands. The room tilted. Alara grabbed the edge of her bed, forcing herself to breathe. To think. Wolfsbane was toxic to everyone, but it was lethal to those with wolf bonds. It disrupted the connection between human and beast, caused seizures, organ failure, death. A small amount could kill. This much? This much could wipe out an entire pack. The treaty was fake. Roderick wasn't seeking peace. He was sending an assassin disguised as a diplomat, using poison hidden in tribute, delivered by someone so disposable, her death would be written off as unfortunate incompetence. Alara sat back on her heels, the full weight of it crashing down like a building collapse. She was the weapon, a walking, breathing murder device. They'd given her poison disguised as silver, sent her into enemy territory, and when everyone who touched it started dying, Roderick would act shocked, would mourn the tragedy, would blame the wolfless failure who'd been too stupid to notice she was carrying death. Perfect deniability. And she'd almost missed it. Alara looked at her hands. They were already red where she'd touched the bars, skin irritated. Poison absorbed through contact, slow but certain. Without a wolf bond to protect her, it would take longer to kill her, weeks maybe, but it would still kill her eventually. They'd planned for that too, counted on her dying before she could expose the truth. The smart play was obvious. Close the chest, walk away, disappear into the night. Change her name, flee to some border town where Roderick's reach didn't extend. Let the king's plan fail through her absence rather than her interference. She'd be abandoning the obsidian frontier to whatever came next, abandoning innocent people to a war they didn't deserve. But she'd be alive. Alara stared at the poisoned silver for a long time. Then she started repacking the chest, carefully replacing the bars she'd moved. She wasn't running, not because she was brave, not because she believed in honor or duty, or any of the pretty words people use to justify terrible decisions, not even because she cared about Kael Veric or his pack. She wasn't running because Roderick had killed her father with lies, destroyed her family with fabrications, and turned her into a ghost for 6 years. He'd made her worthless, powerless, invisible. And now he'd made a mistake. He'd assumed she was too broken to fight back. He'd assumed wrong. Alara spent the night preparing. First, she wrapped her hands in strips torn from her spare shirt, tight enough to protect, loose enough to maintain dexterity. The wolfsbane would still seep through eventually, but it might buy her a few extra days. Second, she went through her single bag 3 times, removing everything non-essential. 1 change of clothes. Her father's journal, the only possession she'd managed to hide during the estate seizure, filled with his observations about court politics and Roderick's corruption. A knife, small but sharp. The treaty scroll in its ornate case. Water flask. Dried meat and hard bread, enough for maybe 4 days if she rationed carefully. A length of rope. A fire starter. 20 pounds exactly. Third, she studied maps. The library had been her refuge for years, and she'd memorized every chart and document. The route north was brutal. 6 days of mountain trails to reach the border, then another 4 through hostile frontier territory to reach Veric's stronghold, assuming the weather held, assuming she didn't freeze, assuming 100 other things that could go wrong. Fourth, and most difficult, she wrote a letter, not to anyone specific, just a record, in case everything went to hell. She described the poisoned tribute, Roderick's plan, her own decision to continue anyway, sealed it and hid it under a loose floorboard in her room. If she died, maybe someone would find it eventually. Probably not, but maybe. Dawn came too fast and too cold. Alara stood in the courtyard wearing every layer she owned, which wasn't much. A wool dress under a riding coat that had seen better years, boots that barely fit, gloves with more holes than fabric. The guards were already mounted, breath fogging in the freezing air. 6 of them, all looking like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. Garrett sat astride a warhorse that looked as mean as he did, watching Alara struggle with the silver chest. They'd loaded it onto a rickety cart, 2 wheels, warped wood, pulled by a leather harness that looked like it might snap any second. "Problem?" he called, clearly amused. "No." Alara gripped the cart's handle, leaning into it. The wheels creaked but moved, barely. "I'm fine." "This'll be entertaining," one of the other guards muttered. They rode out through the north gate as the sun cracked the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and ash. Alara pulled her cart behind the mounted men, already sweating despite the cold. Nobody offered help. Nobody spoke to her. She was cargo that happened to be alive, at least for now. The road north climbed almost immediately, leaving the relatively flat farmlands around the capital for foothills that promised worse to come. Alara's shoulders screamed within the first hour. Her hands, even wrapped, were bleeding by the second. The cart caught on every rock, every root, every imperfection in the frozen path. The guards rode ahead, not even pretending to wait. By midday, they were a quarter mile in front of her, visible only as dark shapes against the snow. Alara kept her head down and pulled. 1 step. Another. Another. The rhythm was almost meditative if you ignored the pain. She'd calculated the wolfsbane's lethality during her sleepless night. Skin contact wouldn't kill immediately. It needed time to absorb, to build up in the bloodstream. But 10 days of handling those bars? Crossing into wolf territory where everyone would touch the tribute, examine it, distribute it, mass execution. And when it was traced back, When Veric's pack started dying, Roderick would act shocked, would apologize profusely, would blame the disgraced wolfless envoy who'd been too incompetent to notice she was carrying death. He'd probably execute her publicly for the crime, make a big show of justice being served, except she wouldn't be there to execute. She'd either be dead already or she'd be far enough away that the truth couldn't touch her. The calculation was beautiful in its cruelty. Roderick had always been good at that. They camped that first night in a clearing that offered no shelter from the wind. The guards built a fire for themselves, a good 20 yards from where Alara finally managed to drag her cart to a stop. She collapsed beside it, every muscle screaming. Nobody brought her firewood. Nobody offered food from their supplies. Alara chewed dried meat that tasted like salted leather and tried to ignore how cold she was. The sun had set fast, taking what little warmth the day had offered. Temperature was dropping quick. Her breath came out in clouds. Her fingers were numb even inside the gloves. She couldn't risk a fire, had nothing to build one with anyway. So she sat with her back against the poisoned chest, wrapped in her coat, and watched the guards laugh and drink around their comfortable blaze. Garrett wandered over eventually, cup of something steaming in hand. The smell of spiced wine hit her like a slap. Warmth she couldn't have. Comfort she wasn't allowed. "You're tougher than you look," he said, crouching beside her. Close enough she could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the broken veins in his nose. "Didn't think you'd make it past the first hill." Alara didn't respond. Wasn't sure what to say that wouldn't make things worse. "Won't matter, though." Garrett took a long drink, savoring it. "You know what's waiting up there, right? Veric doesn't negotiate, doesn't compromise. He sees a wolfless southern girl show up at his door, and he'll gut you for the insult." "Then why send guards?" The question came out before she could stop it. Garrett's smile widened. "We're not here to protect you, Princess. We're here to make sure you don't run before you reach the border. After that?" He shrugged. "Not our problem. You want to turn back? Fine. You want to keep going and die in the frontier? Also fine. But you don't get to run before the job's done." He stood, stretching. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's worse." He walked away, laughing at some private joke, leaving Alara alone in the dark. She did sleep eventually. Fitful, shallow, haunted by dreams of her father's execution and Roderick's smile. Woke up before dawn with frost in her hair and hands that could barely grip the cart handle. But she gripped it anyway, and kept moving north. 6 days of pulling that cart broke something in Alara's body, but hardened something in her mind. Every step was agony. The terrain got worse. Steeper slopes, narrower paths, sections where the cart had to be lifted over obstacles because the wheels wouldn't clear. The guards stopped even looking back. They rode ahead each morning and made camp each evening, a routine that didn't include her except as a distant obligation. Alara's hands stopped bleeding after the second day. They just went numb instead, then cracked open again, then went numb again. She wrapped them tighter, kept moving. The cart's wheels broke on the third day, just gave out on a particularly rough section of trail. She spent 2 hours rigging a replacement using branches and the rope from her pack, turning the cart into a makeshift sled. It was heavier, harder to pull. Didn't matter. She kept moving. Food ran out on the fourth day. She'd been rationing carefully, but not carefully enough. The dried meat was gone. The bread was gone. All she had left was water and whatever snow she could melt. The guards didn't offer to share, didn't even acknowledge that she existed anymore. Alara ate snow and kept walking. The wolfsbane was definitely killing her now. She could feel it, nausea that never quite faded, headaches that split her skull like an axe, a tremor in her hands that got worse every hour. Her vision blurred sometimes. Her balance was shot. She fell more than she wanted to admit, caught herself on rocks that shredded her palms, got up and kept going. Stopping meant freezing to death. So she didn't stop. On the fifth day, they reached territory that didn't feel right. The trees changed. Not all at once, but gradually. Normal pines giving way to twisted black things with bark that looked burned. The rock formations got sharper, more jagged, like the earth itself was trying to cut anyone who passed through. The air felt heavier, colder in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The guards felt it too. Started riding closer together, hands near their weapons, voices low when they spoke at all. This was the edge of the frontier, the boundary between Roderick's kingdom and Veric's territory. And on the sixth evening, They reached the border itself. It wasn't marked with gates or walls, just a line of stone cairns, each one carved with warnings in the northern tongue. Alara couldn't read most of it. Her language studies had focused on southern dialects. But she caught enough. Death waits ahead. Turn back. Only fools continue. Garrett pulled his horse to a stop, staring at those markers like they might come alive. The other guards clustered around him, shifting in their saddles, looking anywhere but forward. Alara dragged her cart up beside them, panting. "What's wrong?" "This is it," Garrett said flatly. "What?" "The border. End of our contract." He was already turning his horse around, the other guards following his lead. Understanding hit like a fist to the gut. "You're supposed to escort me to the stronghold." "No." Garrett's voice was hard, final. "We were supposed to get you to the border. That's what we did. Contracts fulfilled. The rest is your problem. You're abandoning me. We're following orders." He gestured to the other guards who were already moving back down the mountain, not even bothering to hide their relief. "Good luck, Lady Vance. Try not to die too badly. Wait." But they were already leaving, 6 armed soldiers on horseback, disappearing into the twilight like ghosts who'd finished their haunting, leaving her alone at the edge of hell with a cart full of poison and a treaty nobody intended to honor. Alara stood there, watching them go, watching the last trace of southern civilization fade into the distance. Then she looked at the cairns, at the warnings, at the dark trees beyond that seemed to lean in, hungry. She could turn back, follow the guards, return to Roderick's court and tell him the frontier was impossible. She'd tried her best. Please don't kill her for failing. He'd kill her anyway, probably publicly, probably painfully. Or she could keep going, into territory that killed Southerners for sport, toward an alpha who supposedly had no mercy. Dragging poison tribute she'd have to somehow warn him about without getting executed for attempting assassination. Both options were suicide, but only one of them was her choice. Alara gripped the cart handle, took a breath that hurt her entire chest, and walked past the cairns, into the obsidian frontier, into the unknown. And for the first time in 6 years, she wasn't following anyone's orders but her own. The frontier didn't kill you all at once. It wore you down, degree by degree, until you were too tired to notice death creeping up behind you. Alara learned that lesson in the first hour past the cairns. The temperature dropped like she'd walked through an invisible wall into a freezer. The wind picked up, cutting through her layers like they were made of paper, finding every gap in her coat, every hole in her gloves. The trees changed, those twisted black things with bark that looked charred, branches reaching overhead to block what little remained of the fading light. And the silence was wrong. No birds, no rustling of small animals, nothing except the crunch of her boots in snow and the scrape of the sled behind her. The kind of quiet that meant predators nearby. The kind that made prey animals freeze and pray they wouldn't be noticed. Alara was definitely prey here. She kept moving anyway, one step after another, dragging the poison tribute deeper into territory that wanted her dead. Her shoulders screamed, her hands had gone past pain into a distant ache that might have belonged to someone else. The sled caught on everything, roots hidden under snow, rocks that appeared out of nowhere, patches of ice that sent her stumbling. The nausea was getting worse. Wolfsbane poisoning, right on schedule. Her vision blurred at the edges sometimes, doubling. The headache was a constant spike through her temples. She'd started coughing around what she thought was midday, wet, rattling sounds that probably meant her lungs were starting to fail. Still alive, though. That had to count for something. Darkness came fast in the mountains. One moment she had enough light to see the path ahead. The next she was stumbling through shadows that seemed to move independently. Alara had no choice but to stop, to lean the sled against a massive boulder and try to figure out how to survive the night. No fire. Even if she could find dry wood, unlikely, lighting a fire in wolf territory was basically ringing a dinner bell. No shelter except what the trees provided, which wasn't much. The wind cut through the branches like they weren't there. She wedged herself between the sled and the boulder, pulled her coat as tight as it would go, and waited for dawn or death, whichever came first. That's when she heard the footsteps, multiple sets. Moving through the forest with a quiet that meant they knew exactly where she was and didn't care if she heard them coming. Alara's hand went to her knife, that small, inadequate blade that wouldn't do anything against what was out there, and she pressed herself harder against the rock. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched out, heavy and dangerous. Then a voice cut through the darkness. "You lost, Southerner?" Male, rough, with an accent that made the words sound sharp. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the trees. Alara's throat was too dry to answer immediately. She swallowed, forced words out. "I'm here on diplomatic business." Laughter, cold and sharp as breaking ice. "Diplomatic business, you hear that? She's a diplomat." More shapes emerging from the shadows. 3, 4, 5. All of them bigger than her, all moving with that fluid grace that said they were more than human. Wolf bonded. Pack members. And she was wolfless. Alone. Slowly dying from poison. Alpha doesn't see diplomats. One of them stepped closer. Close enough that Alara could smell wet dog and pine and something metallic. Especially not southern ones. Especially not ones stupid enough to cross our border after dark. "I have a treaty from King Roderick. Don't care." The speaker moved into a shaft of moonlight filtering through the branches. Young, maybe mid-20s, with scars slashing across his face that said he'd earned his place in this pack through violence. His eyes reflected light that wasn't there, gleaming gold. "You crossed into frontier territory without permission. That makes you ours. We can kill you, enslave you, or leave you here to freeze. Your choice." Alara forced herself to stand even though her legs shook. "I need to speak with Alpha Veric. It's urgent." "Everything's urgent to Southerners." The scarred one smiled, showing too many teeth. "Tell you what, you tell me what's in that sled, and maybe I'll consider not killing you right now." She couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't say poisoned silver without them assuming she was the assassin. But lying seemed equally dangerous when they could just open it and find out. "Tribute," Alara said carefully. "Silver from King Roderick, as a gesture of goodwill toward peace." "Goodwill." He laughed, a sound like rocks grinding. "Roderick doesn't do goodwill. He does traps and tricks and lies. So I'll ask one more time. What's really in that sled?" Her hesitation answered for her. The scarred one moved faster than she could track. 1 second he was 10 feet away. The next he had her by the throat, lifting her off the ground like she weighed nothing. His hand was furnace hot against her frozen skin. His eyes blazed gold and furious. "You think we're stupid?" His grip tightened, cutting off air. "You think we don't recognize an assassination attempt when it walks through our front door?" Alara clawed at his hand, couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Black spots danced across her vision, multiplying fast. "Darius!" A new voice, deeper, carrying weight. "Put her down!" The grip released instantly. Alara collapsed into the snow, gasping, clutching her bruised throat. Someone else stepped into the small clearing. Older than the others, maybe 50, with gray threading through dark hair. He had the kind of presence that made everyone else seem smaller by comparison. He looked at Alara with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "She's poisoned," he said flatly. Darius stepped back, sudden wariness replacing his anger. "What?" "Wolfsbane. Advanced stage." The older man crouched beside Alara, studying her like a physician examining symptoms. "Look at her hands, that tremor. The way she's breathing, shallow, labored, the pallor." He glanced at the sled. "You've been handling something toxic, for days, I'd guess, which means either you're the stupidest assassin in history or something else is going on here." Alara managed to rasp out words through her damaged throat. "The tribute. It's contaminated. Wolfsbane mixed throughout the silver. I didn't know until the night before I left. Tried to..." A coughing fit cut her off. She spat blood into the snow. "Why come at all?" the older man asked, his voice neutral. "Why not run?" "Because..." She had to stop, breathe, try again. "Because Roderick sent me here to die and to kill all of you. And I'm so goddamn tired of doing what Roderick wants." Silence fell over the clearing. The pack members looked at each other, uncertainty creeping into their aggressive postures. The older man stood, brushing snow from his knees. "My name is Matthias. I'm Beta of the Obsidian Pack, second to Alpha Veric." He gestured to the others. "Bring her in the tribute. Kael will want to see this personally." Darius looked like he wanted to argue. "She could be lying, could be... If she wanted us dead, she wouldn't be half dead herself." Matthias interrupted. Use your brain, Darius. This girl can barely stand. She's been poisoned handling that tribute for nearly a week. That's not how you send an assassin. He started walking. Now move. She won't last much longer in this cold, and the Alpha doesn't appreciate it when I let potential intelligence assets freeze to death. Someone grabbed Alara's arm, hauling her upright with no particular gentleness. Someone else took the sled. They moved through the forest like ghosts, fast and silent, while Alara stumbled between them, trying desperately not to pass out. The trees thinned gradually, opening into terrain that was somehow even more hostile. Black volcanic rock thrusting through snow like broken bones, sharp edges everywhere. And rising from the rock like it had been carved from the mountain itself was the stronghold. Massive didn't cover it. The fortress was built into the cliff face, black stone walls rising sheer and impossible, towers that looked like they were trying to stab the sky. Torches burned along the ramparts, casting light that somehow made the shadows deeper, more menacing. They took her through a gate that looked like a mouth opening to swallow her whole, down corridors that twisted and turned, all black volcanic stone and flickering torchlight. Finally, into a chamber that screamed power, weapons mounted on every wall, maps covering surfaces, a fire roaring in a hearth big enough to roast an entire deer. And sitting in a chair that might as well have been a throne was Kyle Veric. The stories hadn't prepared her for the reality. They'd painted him as a monster, 7 feet of scarred brutality, more beast than man, eyes that glowed in the dark. The truth was somehow more terrifying because it was real and human and utterly cold. He was tall, maybe 6'2", broad-shouldered but not bulky, probably 30 years old. Dark hair pulled back from a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so completely devoid of warmth or mercy. And his eyes, pale blue, the color of glacial ice, the color of frozen lakes that drowned people who fell through. Those eyes looked at Alara like she was a puzzle he was deciding whether to solve or destroy. This is the diplomat? His voice matched his eyes. Arctic. Found her 2 miles past the cairns, Matthias reported. Pulling a sled full of silver. Claims it's poisoned. Claims Roderick sent her here not knowing she was carrying a weapon. Poisoned. Kale stood, and the movement was predatory grace incarnate. Interesting claim. The evidence supports it, Matthias continued. She's got advanced wolfsbane poisoning. Days of exposure, maybe a week. And she's wolfless. It's killing her slower than it would kill us, but it's definitely killing her. Kale moved closer, each step deliberate. He stopped 5 feet away, studying Alara with those merciless eyes. What's your name? Alara Vance. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Something flickered across his expression. Recognition. Marcus Vance's daughter. Her stomach dropped like she'd missed a step on a staircase. How do you know that? I know everything about the Southern Court. He started circling her, slow, assessing. Including the fact that your father was executed for treason 6 years ago, publicly hanged from the North Gate while crowds threw stones, family destroyed, lands seized, wealth scattered to Roderick's favorites. The room tilted. Alara locked her knees to keep from falling. He wasn't a traitor. I know. Kale stopped directly in front of her. He was a witness to Roderick's corruption, documented it carefully, stealing from the treasury, selling military commissions, taking bribes from foreign powers. Your father built a case against the king, and Roderick had him killed before he could present it to the council. The words hit like physical blows. Alara couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. You're lying, she managed. Am I? Kale's tone didn't change. Ask yourself why Roderick seized your family's holdings so quickly. Why he kept you alive but powerless, a ghost in his court. You weren't just a reminder of what happens to traitors, Alara. You were a hostage, insurance against anyone else who might have access to your father's documentation. I don't have anything. They took everything when they arrested him. Did they? Those pale eyes bored into hers. Or did your father hide something they couldn't find, something he knew they'd look for? The journal. Her father's journal, the one she'd hidden for 6 years. The one she'd read dozens of times thinking it was just his personal political observations. What if it was more? What if those observations were actually evidence? I need to sit, Alara said, and this time when her legs gave out, nobody caught her. She hit the stone floor hard enough to jar her teeth. Kale crouched beside her, close enough she could see the absolute lack of pity in his expression. Here's the situation. Matthias will test your tribute carefully. If you're lying about the poison, you die. Slowly, for wasting my time and attempting to assassinate my pack. I'm not lying. If you're telling the truth, he continued, ignoring her interruption, then we have a different problem. Roderick just tried to kill my entire command structure using you as an unwitting weapon. That's an act of war, which means I need to decide whether you're worth keeping alive or whether your death sends a better message to your king. Alara's vision was graying at the edges. Poison, exhaustion, cold, all of it catching up at once. I came here to warn you. That should count for something. Should it? Kale stood in one fluid motion. You also came here carrying enough poison to kill 30 of my people. Whether you knew about it or not, the result would have been the same. So what? You're going to kill me anyway? For crimes I didn't commit? Anger cut through the fog in her brain. Just like Roderick killed my father for crimes he didn't commit, you're exactly like him. Like, Darius growled, stepping forward with violence written across his scarred face. You don't talk to Alpha. Kyle raised one hand. Darius stopped immediately. The Alpha stared at Alara for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Take her to the East Wing, he said finally. Give her a room, not a cell. Post guards. If she tries to run, stop her. If she tries to hurt anyone, kill her. If the Wolfsbane kills her before morning, he shrugged. That solves the problem naturally. And the tribute? Matthias asked. Lock it in the vault. Full contamination protocols. I want 3 different tests confirming the poison before anyone gets within arm's reach. Kale turned back to his chair, dismissing them all. And someone search her belongings, thoroughly. If Marcus Vance left evidence behind, I want it. Hands grabbed Alara, pulled her upright. The room spun wildly. She tried to find words, tried to argue, but her tongue wouldn't cooperate. The last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her whole was Matthias speaking quietly to someone. Get Elena. The girl won't last the night without treatment. Alara woke to warmth and confusion. She was in a bed, an actual bed with a real mattress and blankets that didn't smell like mildew. The room was stone, walls, floor, ceiling, but there was heat coming from vents near the floor, probably connected to whatever geothermal system kept this frozen fortress livable. Her hands were bandaged, properly bandaged, with clean white cloth and something underneath that smelled medicinal. Someone had stripped her wet, filthy clothes and replaced them with clean ones. Simple wool shirt and pants that were too big but warm and dry. She sat up slowly, testing her body. The nausea was still there, the headache present but duller. Less immediate than it had been. Don't move too fast. The voice came from a chair near the door. Alara's head whipped around. Bad idea. The room tilted, and she found herself looking at a woman she hadn't noticed. 50s maybe, with iron gray hair pulled back in a practical braid. Weathered face, steady hands, eyes that had seen more than anyone should have to see. Who are you? Alara's voice came out rough. Elena, pack healer. The woman stood, moved to the bedside. Hold still. Before Alara could protest, Elena pressed fingers to her throat, her wrist, her forehead. Checking pulse, temperature, something. Her touch was professional, impersonal. Heart rate elevated but stable, Elena said, more to herself than Alara. Breathing rough but better than when they brought you in. Fever's down. The Wolfsbane is still in your system, but you're metabolizing it slower than someone with a wolf bond would. She stepped back. Being wolfless might actually save your life in this case. How long was I unconscious? 10 hours. It's morning now, or close enough. Elena moved to a small table, poured water from a pitcher into a cup. Drink this. Slowly. Alara took the cup with shaking hands. The water was cold and tasted faintly of minerals, but it was the best thing she'd ever had. She drained half before remembering to slow down. The tribute, she started, confirmed Wolfsbane contamination throughout. Elena's expression hardened. Matthias tested it himself with full protocols. You were right, that silver would have killed anyone who handled it for more than a few hours. Distributed normally among the pack, it could have wiped out 40, maybe 50 people. I didn't know until the night before. I know. Kyle knows. The evidence supports your story. Elena refilled the cup. You're still alive because of that evidence. But don't mistake pragmatism for trust. You're a southerner carrying poison, daughter of an executed traitor, representative of a king who just tried to commit mass murder. The only reason you're in a room instead of a grave is because killing you serves no purpose right now. Comforting, Alara said dryly. Elena almost smiled. You've got spine, that's good. You'll need it. She moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the latch. Kael will send for you when he's ready. Could be an hour, could be a day. In the meantime, don't try to leave this room. The guards outside have orders to stop you, and they won't be gentle about it. I can't leave anyway. I can barely stand. That's also true. Elena opened the door. One more thing. Whatever your father wrote in that journal they found in your bag, Kael's reading it now. All of it. If there's anything in there you'd rather explain yourself before he draws his own conclusions, you should think about what you're going to say. Then she was gone, leaving Alara alone with growing dread. They had the journal. Of course they did. They'd searched her belongings. Kael had ordered it specifically, which meant he was reading 6 years of her father's careful documentation of court politics and Roderick's crimes. Documentation she hadn't understood was evidence until about 12 hours ago. Alara pushed herself out of bed, ignoring her body's protests, tested her legs. They held, barely. She made it to the small window, just a slit in the stone, really, and looked out at the obsidian frontier in daylight. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Black rock and white snow under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Mountains stretching to the horizon in every direction. No villages visible, no farms, just wilderness that didn't care if you lived or died. She'd chosen this. Chosen to keep walking when the guards abandoned her. Chosen to cross the cairns. Chosen to drag poisoned tribute into enemy territory. Now she had to live with the consequences. They came for her 3 hours later. Not Elena. Not guards. Matthias himself, the beta, who'd saved her life in the forest. He knocked once, more warning than request, and opened the door. Alpha wants to see you. You can walk or I can carry you. Alara stood, using the wall for support. I can walk. We'll see. She made it down one corridor, up a flight of stairs, halfway down another corridor before her legs decided they were done. Matthias caught her without comment, lifted her over his shoulder like she weighed nothing, and kept walking. This is humiliating, Alara muttered into his back. You're alive to be humiliated. Some would call that fortunate. He carried her through passages that all looked identical. Black stone, torches, doors that probably led to rooms she didn't want to see. Finally, into a chamber that was clearly Kael's personal space. One wall was covered in maps showing territories far beyond what Roderick claimed. Another wall held weapons, not decorative pieces, functional blades and bows and things Alara couldn't identify. The back wall was lined with bookshelves holding hundreds of volumes in different languages. And sitting at a desk covered in papers was Kael, reading her father's journal. Matthias set Alara down in a chair with more care than she expected. She made it 2 corridors this time. Noted. Kael didn't look up. Leave us. You sure? She's weak, but desperate people do stupid things. She can barely stand. I think I can handle her. Kael turned a page. Close the door on your way out. Matthias left with obvious reluctance. The door closed with a heavy thunk that sounded far too final. Kael kept reading. Alara sat in silence, watching him, trying to gauge what he was thinking and finding nothing. His expression was completely neutral, giving away nothing. Finally, he set the journal down and looked at her with those glacier eyes. Your father was a meticulous man. Alara's breath caught. She'd known this was coming, but it still felt like a blow. He documented everything, Kael continued, tapping the journal. Every shady trade deal, every fabricated charge, every political execution disguised as criminal justice. 6 years of Roderick's corruption laid out in careful, precise detail. He paused. Why didn't you know what you were carrying? I thought it was just his observations, political commentary, things he noticed at court. Alara's voice sounded hollow in her own ears. I didn't realize it was evidence that could destroy a king, Kael finished. Yes. This would have done exactly that if your father had lived long enough to present it. Names, dates, amounts, witnesses he'd interviewed, paper trails he'd traced. It's comprehensive. He stood, walked around the desk. Alara tensed, but he just leaned against the front edge, arms crossed, studying her. Roderick tried to kill my pack using you as an unwitting weapon, he said. That's an act of war. I could march south tomorrow, burn his capital to ash, mount his head on my wall. It would be justified. But you won't, Alara said, reading something in his tone. War is expensive, messy. A lot of people die who don't deserve it. Kale tilted his head slightly. I prefer precision, surgical strikes, cutting out the rot without burning down the entire structure. What are you suggesting? Your father's evidence is 6 years old. Solid, but dated. Roderick could claim it's outdated, that he's reformed, that circumstances have changed. Kale's eyes never left hers. But if we could update the ledger, find current proof, build a case so comprehensive that even his staunchest allies would abandon him, that would be more effective than any army. Understanding dawned slowly. You want to investigate him. I want to destroy him, Kyle corrected, not through violence, through truth. Expose every crime, every betrayal, every stolen coin. Turn his own court against him. Watch him fall, not because I killed him, but because I revealed what he really is. It was elegant, brutal and elegant and absolutely ruthless. The kind of revenge that didn't just end someone, it erased them. You think I can help with this? Alara said. You've been in his court for 6 years. Invisible, underestimated, forgotten. You've seen things others missed because they didn't think you mattered. Kale leaned forward slightly. You want revenge for what he did to your family? Here's your chance. Help me build the case that destroys him. Every logical part of Valara's brain screamed that this was insane. She was poisoned, exhausted, trapped in enemy territory with an alpha who could kill her on a whim. Agreeing to this meant committing treason, real treason, against her own kingdom. But Roderick wasn't her kingdom anymore. He'd killed her father, destroyed her family, sent her here to die. And Kyle was offering her exactly what she wanted most in the world: revenge. What's the price? She asked, because nothing came free. You stay here, in the frontier, under my protection and my authority. Kale's tone was matter of fact. You don't go back south. You don't contact anyone from your old life. You become part of this pack. I'm wolfless. I don't care. Half my pack is wolfless. We judge on competence, not bloodlines. He gestured dismissively. You have strategic value, knowledge of the court, understanding of politics, skills in languages and law, and you have personal motivation to see this through to the end. You're recruiting me. I'm offering you a choice. Kale straightened. Help me destroy Roderick and get your revenge. Or refuse, and I'll find another way to handle him. But I should mention, Roderick will assume you're dead within a few days. Frozen in the mountains, killed by wolves, doesn't matter. You're already erased from his world. Going back would just get you actually killed. Probably publicly and definitely painfully. He was right. She knew he was right. There was no going back to the capital and explaining that she'd discovered the poison tribute and decided to warn the enemy instead of dying quietly. Roderick would execute her for treason. Real treason this time. One condition, Alara said. Kale raised an eyebrow, waiting. When we destroy him, when it's finished, I want to be there. I want to see his face when he realizes everything's gone, when he knows he's lost. She leaned forward, ignoring the way it made her head swim. I want him to know it was me. For the first time since she'd met him, Kyle smiled. It was sharp and cold and absolutely genuine. The smile of a predator who'd just found worthy prey. Deal. He offered his hand across the desk. Alara stood, barely, legs shaking, and took it. His grip was warm and steady, and felt like the first real choice she'd made in 6 years. Welcome to the Obsidian Pack, Alara Vance. Kyle released her hand. Try not to die of poison before we finish this. I'll do my best, she said, and meant it. Good. He moved back to his chair, already shifting into planning mode. Matthias will show you to proper quarters. Rest today. Tomorrow we start mapping out Roderick's network, who he pays, who pays him, where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. Alara made it to the door before curiosity overrode caution. She paused, hand on the latch. Why are you really doing this? It can't just be about Roderick. Kale looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its ice. My father tried to reform this pack, fought against the old ways, the cruelty, the waste, The brutal hierarchy that crushed anyone weak. He had enemies because of it. They poisoned him slowly, political assassination disguised as illness. His eyes were distant, remembering. I challenged him to ritual combat for leadership before he could die in bed like a coward. Gave him a warrior's death. Let the pack see him fall with honor instead of wasting away. The stories say you murdered him for power. The stories are useful. Kael's focus returned to the present, sharp as a blade. They make people afraid, and fear is a tool, but the truth is simpler. I won't let people like my father's killers win. Won't let corrupt kings destroy good men and get away with it. He picked up her father's journal. So yes, this is about Roderick, but it's also about making sure men like him don't survive, ever. Alara didn't know what to say. Didn't have words for the sudden understanding that this brutal alpha and her dead father might have been more alike than anyone would have guessed. So she just nodded and left, following Matthias through corridors that felt less like enemy territory and more like something she might actually survive. Maybe even something she could call home. The quarters Matthias showed her to were better than anything she'd had in 6 years. Stone walls carved with patterns that might have been decorative or might have been northern script. A real bed with thick furs, a desk with actual chairs, a fireplace with wood stacked beside it, even a bathing room with a copper tub and water that ran hot from volcanic vents beneath the fortress. Alara didn't question any of it, just collapsed onto the bed and slept for 16 hours straight. When she woke, food waited on the desk. Bread, cheese, dried meat, water. No note. She ate without tasting anything and tried to process what she'd agreed to. Help destroy a king, commit actual treason, all while trapped in a fortress full of wolves who had every reason to hate Southerners. The smart part of her brain screamed this was suicide dressed up as strategy. The rest of her didn't care anymore. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She knew it wouldn't be a request. Come in. Matthias entered carrying books and papers, set them on the desk without ceremony. Kael wants you educated before you're useful. Frontier histories, political structures, trade agreements. Read them, learn them. You'll be tested. Tested? You think he trusts a Southerner based on a handshake and some poisoned silver? Matthias's expression was flat. Prove you can think like we do. Prove you understand how power actually works up here. Then maybe you become an asset instead of a liability. He left before she could respond. Alara stared at the stack. The books were worn, well-used, margins filled with notes in different hands. Real research materials, not the sanitized propaganda Roderick's court allowed. She opened the first one and started reading. 3 days disappeared into information that contradicted everything she'd been taught about the North. The frontier wasn't some lawless wasteland ruled by brutal alphas crushing anyone weaker. It was a network of semi-independent packs maintaining complex treaties through mutual benefit rather than fear. They valued competence over bloodlines, had built a functional economy in terrain that should have made civilization impossible. Kael's father had started the reforms 20 years ago. Took a pack structure built entirely on dominance and violence and tried to reshape it into something sustainable, something that didn't burn through lives like firewood. He'd made enemies doing it. Traditionalists who equated strength with cruelty. Opportunists who profited from the old chaos. They'd killed him for it, slowly over months, with poison in his food. Kael had taken power at 22 and finished what his father started. The margin notes told that story and crossed out names and challenged dates recorded in matter-of-fact language that hid nothing. Alara recognized the pattern. Her father had tried to expose corruption through proper channels, through law and careful documentation. Had believed the system could police itself if given enough evidence. He'd been catastrophically wrong. Kael had learned the opposite lesson. Systems didn't fix themselves. You force change through superior power by making resistance cost more than compliance. On the 4th day, Matthias came back. Kael wants you. Conference room, 10 minutes. Alara had graduated from barely walking to mostly steady. The wolfsbane was metabolizing faster thanks to Elena's treatments. Still got dizzy sometimes, still coughed occasionally, but she could function without collapsing. She followed Matthias down corridors she was starting to recognize, downstairs into the fortress's lower levels, finally into a room dominated by a massive table covered in maps. Kael stood at the head, arms crossed, staring at a detailed map of the southern kingdoms. Darius was there, along with three others she didn't recognize. Two women and a man, all with that lean, dangerous look of people who survived by being smarter and meaner than their enemies. Alara. Kale didn't look up from the map. Tell me about Roderick's revenue sources. No greeting, no small talk. Straight to testing whether she'd actually learned anything. She moved to the table, studied the map, started talking. Primary income is agricultural taxes from the central provinces. Wheat, barley, livestock. Secondary is tariffs on the coastal trade routes, silk and spices from the eastern kingdoms mostly. Tertiary is mining operations in the western hills, iron, copper, some silver. Percentages. Agriculture is roughly 40% of total revenue. Trade tariffs 30, mining 20. The remaining 10 is miscellaneous, court fees, property taxes, fines. Wrong! One of the women spoke up, dark-haired with scars across her knuckles that suggested a violent history. Mining is at least 30%, possibly higher. Not according to the official treasury records, Alara countered. The public ledgers clearly show official records lie. The woman smiled without warmth. My name is Vera. I run intelligence for the Northern Territories. I've seen the real numbers through sources inside the mining guilds. Roderick's been systematically underreporting mining revenue for at least 8 years, skimming the difference into private accounts. Alara's mind raced through implications. That would require active cooperation from the guild masters. They'd need to be either paid off or threatened into silence. Both, probably. Kale finally looked at her. Your father documented some of it. Payments to guild officials, fabricated production reports, falsified export manifests. But he didn't have the complete picture before they killed him. Because he ran out of time, Alara said quietly. Yes. Kale moved around the table, pointing to different regions marked on the map. Roderick has been building a secondary revenue stream that doesn't appear in any public accounting. Based on what we've been able to piece together, we estimate he's hidden somewhere between 2 and 3 million in gold over the past decade. The number staggered her. That was enough to fund a small army for years, enough to buy loyalty across multiple kingdoms. Where's he keeping it? That's the critical question. Kale's finger tapped the capital city. Not in the royal treasury. Those records get audited, even if the auditors are corrupt enough to overlook some discrepancies. Not in foreign banks, too much paper trail, too many witnesses. It has to be somewhere he controls absolutely, somewhere secure enough to store that much wealth without anyone asking questions. The old fortress, Alara said, the realization hitting her like cold water. The abandoned military garrison just outside the capital. It's been listed as under renovation for 15 years, but nothing ever actually gets completed. My father used to joke that Roderick was building the world's slowest castle. Silence fell over the room. Everyone was staring at her. That's, Vera started, then stopped, clearly reconsidering. That's actually plausible. Military site means controlled access. Legitimate reason for heavy guard presence. Perfect place to store wealth you don't want documented in official records. Can you confirm it? Kale asked Alara directly. I'd need to see the actual building records. Supply manifests, guard rotation schedules. The kind of documentation that would show what's really happening there versus what's being officially reported. She met his pale eyes steadily. And I can't get any of that from here. No. Kale's voice was absolutely flat. But you could get it from the capital. The room went very, very still. You want me to go back? Alara said slowly, making sure she understood what he was suggesting. I want you to do what you've apparently been doing for 6 years. Be invisible. Slip back into Roderick's court, convince him you failed the mission, but somehow survived. Play the broken, traumatized subject who barely escaped the savage frontier with her life. Kyle leaned forward, hands flat on the table. Get access to those records. Find concrete proof of where he's hiding the money and how much there is. Then get out before he figures out what you really are. That's suicide, Darius said flatly. She shows up alive after we were supposed to kill her, and Roderick will immediately know something's wrong. Not if she sells it correctly. Kale didn't look away from Alara. You're wolfless, untrained in combat, physically weak by our standards. You stumbled back across the border half dead from exposure, traumatized by what you saw, lucky to be alive. He'll believe it because it confirms absolutely everything he already thinks about you. Alara's heart was hammering, but she kept her voice level. And when I get the proof? We'll have people positioned to extract you. One signal, we move. Kale straightened. But you need to understand, if this goes wrong, we cannot save you. You'll be completely on your own in enemy territory with a king who will have you executed slowly and publicly for treason, as opposed to being here, where I'm definitely not in enemy territory surrounded by people who wanted to kill me a week ago, Alara said dryly. Vera actually laughed at that. I like her. The real question, Kael continued, ignoring the interruption, is whether you can actually do it. Whether you can walk back into that court, smile at the man who murdered your father, and convince him you're still the worthless ghost he's always believed you to be. Could she? The old Alara, the one who'd spent 6 years being invisible and forgotten, could have done it without breaking a sweat. But that Alara had died somewhere in the frozen mountains, dragging poison tribute through hell because running seemed worse than fighting. This Alara had made different choices, had chosen to warn enemies instead of dying quietly, had chosen to stay and plan revenge instead of accepting her fate. I can do it, she said, and hoped desperately it was true. Kale studied her for a long moment with those glacier eyes, then nodded once. We start preparation tomorrow. You'll have 1 week to get ready. The next 7 days were the most intense education of Alara's life. Vera drilled her relentlessly on the cover story. What happened after the guards abandoned her at the border, how she survived in the mountains, where she found shelter, how she avoided the wolves, how she made it back across into Southern territory. You're terrified, Vera said during one brutal session. You barely survived. You wake up screaming from nightmares about wolf eyes in the darkness. When people ask about the frontier, your hands shake. When they mention Veric's name, you flinch like they hit you. You sell the trauma hard because that trauma is your armor. It's what makes you beneath suspicion. Won't they wonder why I came back at all? Why not just disappear? Because you're loyal, because you failed and you need to report that failure, because you have nowhere else to go. Vera's eyes were hard. You're not a hero who survived impossible odds. You're a victim who got lucky and crawled home to beg forgiveness. That's the story. Believe it yourself or you'll never sell it to them. Matthias handled the physical conditioning. The wolfsbane was mostly metabolized now, thanks to Elena's aggressive treatments, but Alara was still weak from weeks of poisoning and near starvation. He pushed her through exercises that left her gasping and shaking. You need to look like someone who survived hell, he said, watching her struggle through another set of push-ups. But you also need to actually be able to survive if everything falls apart, and you have to run. Soft scholars die fast when plans go sideways. I'm not a scholar. Could have fooled me with all those books you've been reading, but there was something almost like approval in his voice. Again, proper form this time. Elena handled what she called the finishing touches. Controlled scarring that looked like wolf claws. Strategic bruising that told a story of violence barely escaped. A slight limp that would fade in time but looked convincing now. Roderick needs to see visual proof that you suffered, Elena explained while applying something that made Alara's shoulder look genuinely mauled. Give him the physical confirmation of all his assumptions. Let him think he already knows your whole story before you even open your mouth. And Kale taught her the most critical skill of all, how to lie to someone who thought they knew all your secrets. Roderick believes you're broken, Kale said during one session in his private office. That's his fundamental blind spot. He sees weakness where there's actually strategy. He sees a victim where there's a survivor calculating her next move. Use that. Let him think he's won just by keeping you alive and compliant. What if he doesn't believe me? Alara asked. What if he suspects? Then you run immediately. Don't try to convince him. Don't try to salvage the mission. Just run. Kale's expression was absolutely serious. Pride gets spies killed. Fear keeps them breathing long enough to escape. On the 8th day, Vera came to Alara's quarters carrying a travel pack and clothes. Southern style, worn but serviceable. The kind of thing a desperate survivor would be wearing. Tomorrow, Vera said simply. We move at dawn. 2 of my people will get you across the border and within sight of the southern patrol routes. After that, you're completely on your own. Alara nodded, her throat too tight for words. That night she couldn't sleep. Just lay in bed staring at the stone ceiling, trying to quiet the screaming in her head. She was about to walk back into Roderick's court, about to face the man who'd ordered her father's execution, about to bet her entire life on being a convincing enough liar. A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiral into panic. "It's open," she called, not bothering to get up. Kyle entered, which surprised her enough that she sat up quickly. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Seems like a waste of my last night alive," she said, only half joking. "Optimistic outlook." He moved to the small window, looking out at the frontier darkness. "I came to give you this." He held out a small object, a ring, silver, with a black stone set in simple metalwork. Alara took it carefully. "What is it?" "Communication device. Old magic, tied to a matching ring I wear." He showed her an identical band on his left hand. "If you get in serious trouble and need immediate extraction, you turn the stone 3 times clockwise and press down hard. I'll know instantly." "That's..." Alara stared at the ring. "That's incredibly useful. Why are you only giving it to me now?"
Buckball Shanish.
"Because if you'd had it from the beginning, you might have relied on it as a crutch. Might not have pushed yourself to actually learn what you need to survive on your own." Kale turned to face her fully. "Now you know you can handle yourself. The ring is emergency backup, not a replacement for competence." She slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the stone cool against her skin. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If you trigger that ring and we can't reach you in time..." He left the sentence deliberately unfinished. "I understand the risks. Do you?" Kale moved closer, and Alara had to force herself not to lean back. "You're about to walk into enemy territory and convince a murderous king you're still his loyal subject. Then you're going to steal evidence that could trigger a war. Then you're going to escape before anyone notices. One mistake anywhere in that chain, and you die, slowly and publicly." "I know," Alara said steadily. "Then why are you doing it?" The question wasn't rhetorical. Kale actually seemed curious. Revenge? Duty? Proving something to yourself? Alara thought about it. About her father hanging from the north gate while crowds threw stones. About 6 years of being a ghost that haunted Roderick's court. About the king's satisfied smile as he sent her north to die. "All of those reasons," she said finally, "and because I'm so tired of being afraid, tired of hiding, tired of letting him win just by continuing to exist." She met Kyle's pale eyes directly. "He spent 6 years making me into nothing. I'm going to return that favor with interest." Something that might have been respect flickered across Kyle's face. "Good answer." He headed for the door, paused at the threshold. "Don't die, Alara. I've invested too much training in you to have it wasted." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the ring and her racing thoughts. Dawn came cold and gray, the sky the color of old iron. Vera and 2 others, a lean man named Cole and a compact woman called Iris, met Alara at the fortress gates. They moved fast through the frontier, taking paths that avoided the obvious routes, traveling in near total silence except for occasional warnings about terrain. Alara kept pace, barely. Her conditioning had improved dramatically, but she wasn't built for this kind of sustained speed over rough ground. By midday, her legs were screaming and her lungs felt like they were on fire. "Water break," Vera called, more for Alara's benefit than anyone else's. They stopped in a small clearing. Alara drank gratefully, trying not to show just how much she was struggling. "You're doing better than I expected," Iris said. She looked young, maybe 20, with the kind of easy confidence that came from being extremely good at violence. Most Southerners would have collapsed hours ago. Most Southerners didn't spend a week dragging 200 pounds of poison tribute through frozen hell, Alara managed between gulps of water. Cole laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "She's got a point." They moved again as soon as Alara could breathe normally. The terrain started shifting, less volcanic rock, more normal pine forest. The border was getting close. They reached it just as the sun was setting. The cairns on this side were different, southern construction, carved with warnings in the common tongue. Beyond them, the forest opened into terrain Alara recognized from childhood. "This is as far as we go," Vera said quietly. "Southern patrol routes run through this area every 6 hours. Next patrol comes through in about 40 minutes. You'll hear them long before they see you. They make enough noise to wake the dead." "What do I do when they find me?" "Exactly what we practiced. You're traumatized, lost, barely survived. Let them take you back to the capital. Let them report to Roderick that you somehow made it home alive against all odds." Vera gripped Alara's shoulder, surprisingly gentle. "And remember, the mission matters, but your life matters more. If it goes bad, If you get compromised, you run. Don't be a hero. Heroes die stupid deaths. I'm not remotely built for heroics anyway. Smart woman. Vera stepped back. Good luck, Southerner. Try very hard not to get killed. Then they were gone, melting back into the frontier forest like they'd never been there at all. Alara stood alone at the border, waiting for Southern soldiers who would take her back to face her father's murderer. The ring on her finger felt heavy, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone, that somewhere in the Black Fortress, an Alpha was waiting for her signal if everything went catastrophically wrong. She turned the stone once, experimentally. Nothing happened. Good. That meant it was working properly. She found a fallen log and sat, arranging herself to look exhausted and injured. Wasn't difficult since she actually was both. Then she waited. The patrol found her 37 minutes later. 6 soldiers moving through the forest with enough noise to announce themselves to anything with ears. They saw her and stopped immediately, weapons coming up. Identify yourself, the leader barked. Alara looked up with deliberately wide, terrified eyes, let her voice shake authentically. Please, my name is Alara Vance. I was sent north on a diplomatic mission 3 weeks ago. The guards abandoned me at the border and She let herself start crying. After everything, the tears came easily. I barely made it back alive. Please, I need to get home. I need to see the king. The soldiers exchanged uncertain looks. The leader lowered his weapon slowly. Lady Vance? The diplomat who was sent to the Obsidian frontier? Yes. Alara stood on deliberately shaking legs, swayed convincingly, caught herself against the log. Please, I have to report what happened. I have to tell His Majesty. Easy. The leader stepped forward, suddenly solicitous. You're safe now. We'll take you back to the capital. Can you ride? I think so. They gave her water, wrapped her in a spare cloak, helped her onto a horse with exaggerated gentleness, asked careful questions about what happened and seemed completely satisfied with her stumbling, terrified answers. By the time they reached the capital 2 days later, the story had already spread ahead of them. The failed diplomat who somehow survived. The wolf-less girl who escaped the Winter Butcher's territory through sheer desperate luck. Alara let them tell the story however they wanted. Let them paint her as a victim. Let them believe whatever made them comfortable. And when they finally brought her before Roderick in that same throne room where he'd essentially sentenced her to death, she fell to her knees and sobbed like her heart was breaking. Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. I failed you. I couldn't deliver the treaty. They were going to kill me, and I ran. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Roderick looked down at her with pure satisfaction, with vindication, with the smile of a man whose lowest expectations had been proven absolutely correct. Rise, Lady Vance, he said, voice dripping false sympathy. You're home now. You're safe. We'll hear your full report in due time, but for now, rest, recover. You've clearly been through a terrible ordeal. Thank you, Your Majesty. Alara let her voice break. Thank you so much. They led her away like she was made of glass, put her back in her tiny room in the servants' wing, left her alone, clearly believing she was broken and pathetically grateful just to be alive. And that night, sitting alone in the dark, Alara pulled out her father's journal, turned to a page filled with names, dates, locations, started cross-referencing it with everything she'd learned about the old fortress. The real hunt had finally begun. 2 weeks of playing the perfect traumatized survivor. She flinched at sudden noises, avoided the main court areas, had visible nightmares that servants whispered about, made herself small and forgettable and damaged. And she watched everything, listened to everything, learned everything. The old fortress guard rotations were documented in the military records office. She found them while supposedly researching her father's service history, accidentally pulling the wrong files. The supply manifests were kept in the Treasury office, where she volunteered to help with basic copying work because she needed something to occupy her mind. Piece by careful piece, she built the picture. The fortress was definitely storing something beyond normal military supplies. The manifest showed regular deliveries of materials that didn't match any actual construction work. The guard rotations were far too heavy for a simple building site. And 3 days ago, she'd personally seen Lord Brennan leaving the fortress grounds with a heavy escort and a locked iron chest. Tonight, she was going in. The wall was easier to climb than she'd expected. Ongoing reconstruction meant scaffolding everywhere, and scaffolding meant access. Alara went over at midnight, timing it for the guard change when attention was most scattered. The fortress interior was dark and cold. She moved by memory and careful planning, avoiding the areas where she knew guards patrolled. Found the stairs she was looking for. Going down. Not up toward storage rooms or barracks. Down toward cellars, toward vaults. The first sublevel held normal supplies. Grain, weapons, armor, nothing unusual. The second level was more of the same. The third level was locked behind a heavy door that took Alara 15 brutal minutes to pick with shaking hands. Beyond it was gold, stacks and stacks of it, chests overflowing with coins, bars stamped with various kingdom seals, jewelry that had probably been confiscated or stolen. More concentrated wealth than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Enough to fund a private army, or a comfortable retirement, or an entire shadow kingdom built on systematic corruption. Alara pulled out the small camera device Vera had given her, Northern technology, incredibly compact, designed specifically for espionage work, started photographing everything methodically. The gold itself. The detailed ledgers stacked beside it, documenting where every piece came from. The names of officials who'd helped embezzle it over the years. She was halfway through the third ledger when she heard footsteps. Multiple sets. Coming down the stairs, fast. Her heart stopped completely. She looked around frantically. No other exits, nowhere to hide except behind the stacks of gold, and that wouldn't work for more than a few seconds. The ring on her finger suddenly felt like it was burning. 3 turns clockwise, press hard. She did it without conscious thought. Then she dove behind the largest stack of gold chests, pressed herself flat against the cold stone floor, and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed for anything. The door crashed open. Torchlight flooded the vault, harsh and revealing. Voices. Terribly familiar voices. Absolutely certain she's the leak? That was Lord Brennan's voice, cold and furious. Completely positive. Roderick himself, and Alara's blood turned to ice water. She somehow survived the frontier when she should have died. Made it back here when that was impossible. And now, suddenly, Veric knows things he absolutely should not know. She's either the luckiest idiot who ever lived, or she's actively working for him. Then why haven't we simply executed her already? Because I want to know exactly what she told them, what she knows, what Veric is planning with the information. Heavy footsteps coming closer to where Alara was hiding. And then I will have her executed, publicly, slowly, an unforgettable example of what happens to traitors in my kingdom. Alara pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making any sound. Her entire body was shaking. Spread the word immediately, Roderick continued. The Vance girl is to be arrested on sight. Charges of treason, espionage, conspiracy against the crown. Bring her to me alive. I want to hear her full confession before she hangs from the same gate where her traitor father died. The footsteps retreated. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked with horrible finality. Silence fell like a burial shroud. Alara waited 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Then a full minute. Finally, risked looking out from behind the gold. Empty. She ran. Up the stairs, through corridors, out the same route she'd used coming in. Over the wall, into the dark streets, running blind through the capital at midnight with guards who would kill her on sight if they recognized her. The ring on her finger pulsed once, soft but definite. Acknowledgement received. Help was coming. But from where? And how soon could they possibly reach her? She ducked into an alley, pressed her back against the rough stone wall, trying desperately to think through the panic threatening to drown her. She had the evidence. Mission technically complete. The camera held photographs of everything, the gold, the ledgers, all the proof they needed to destroy Roderick. But she was trapped in a city that was about to mobilize an entire garrison to hunt her down. Footsteps echoed from the main street, voices shouting orders. The systematic search was already beginning. Alara looked at the ring, still pulsing softly on her finger. Looked at the camera clutched in her other hand containing evidence that could topple a king, and started running toward the only possible escape route. The North Gate, the border, the frontier that meant safety if she could just somehow reach it alive. Behind her, alarm horns began to blow. Deep, resonant, terrifying. The sound spreading across the entire capital like ripples from a stone thrown in still water. The hunt was officially on, and Alara was the prey. Alara made it 3 blocks before soldiers spotted her. "There, the Vance girl! Stop her!" She ran harder, lungs screaming, legs threatening to buckle, cut through alleys she remembered from childhood, vaulted over a low wall, crashed through someone's garden. Behind her, the shouts multiplied, spreading through the capital like wildfire. The North Gate was half a mile away, might as well have been on the moon. She turned a corner and slammed directly into someone solid. Went down hard, vision exploding with stars. Looked up, expecting a soldier's sword pointed at her throat. Instead saw a woman in plain traveling clothes, face shadowed by a hood. Something familiar in the set of her shoulders. "Vera," Elara gasped. "Shut up and move." Vera hauled her upright with brutal efficiency, shoved her toward a gap between buildings so narrow Elara hadn't even noticed it. "Go, now! Don't look back, don't slow down, don't think, just run." "How did you—" Kale sent 3 extraction teams the second your signal came through. "We've been positioned around this city since the day you walked back through the gates. Now run before I leave your ass here to hang." They ran. Vera led through passages that shouldn't have existed, moving with absolute confidence through a city she'd never lived in. Behind them, the shouts faded, surged louder, faded again as they twisted through the urban maze. At the North Gate, Cole waited with horses, his face grim in the torchlight. "Cutting it extremely close," he said. "Story of my entire life lately." Vera practically threw Elara at a horse. "Can you ride hard?" "Yes." "Then ride like every demon in hell is chasing you, because they basically are. Don't stop until you see frontier cairns. Don't stop if you're tired. Don't stop if you're bleeding. Just don't stop." Elara mounted, kicked the horse into immediate motion. Vera and Cole flanked her as they burst through the gate at full gallop, guards shouting behind them, scrambling for their own mounts. Arrows whistled past in the darkness. One caught Elara's sleeve, tearing fabric, missing flesh by maybe an inch. Cole returned fire without slowing, his bow singing deadly songs. They hit open ground running at speeds that felt insane. The horses were frontier-bred, built for brutal endurance and raw power. Southern cavalry mounts couldn't match them over distance, but Southern crossbows had terrifying range. A bolt caught Cole's horse in the flank with a meaty thunk. The animal screamed, a sound that would haunt Elara forever, and went down in a catastrophic tangle of legs. Cole rolled clear somehow, came up with his bow already drawn, firing with mechanical precision. "Go!" he shouted. "I'll buy you the time you need." "Cole—" Vera's voice actually broke. "That's a direct order. Go now." They went. Elara looked back once, saw Cole making his final stand against impossible odds, one man against a dozen soldiers, buying seconds with his life, each arrow finding its mark with grim accuracy. Then they were into the foothills, the forest, terrain that made Southerners turn back in fear. The pursuit faltered, fell away, lost them in darkness and unfamiliar ground. They didn't slow until they crossed the cairns into frontier territory proper. Only then did Vera pull up, both of them breathing hard, horses lathered with foam and sweat. "You got it?" Vera asked, voice tight and controlled. "Please tell me you got the evidence before this entire thing went to hell." Elara pulled out the camera with shaking hands, held it up. "Everything. The gold, the ledgers, all of it. Every detail you could want." "Then Cole didn't die for nothing." Vera's voice was absolutely flat, all emotion locked down so tight it had to hurt. "Let's get you home before someone else has to make that sacrifice." Home. The word still felt strange applied to the frontier. But as they rode deeper into black volcanic landscape toward the fortress that rose from the mountain like it had been carved by ancient gods, Elara realized it didn't feel wrong anymore. Felt more like home than the capital ever had. They rode through the night without stopping, Vera pushing a pace that left no room for conversation or thought. Dawn found them within sight of the fortress walls, where Matthias waited at the gates with a full-armed escort. "Cole?" he asked Vera quietly, though his face said he already knew. "Didn't make it. Bought us the time we needed fighting off a dozen soldiers." Vera's voice stayed locked down. He knew exactly what he was doing. Chose it. Matthias nodded once, jaw tight, then looked at Elara. "Kale wants you immediately. War room. He's been pacing like a caged animal since your signal came through 6 hours ago." They took her straight there, still covered in road dust and probably smelling like horse and fear and desperation. The massive table was surrounded by more people than Alara had seen assembled before. Pack leaders, military advisors, intelligence officers, all of them turning to stare at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. And at the head of the table stood Kael, those glacier eyes locking onto her the instant she entered. You have it? No greeting, no relief that she'd survived, just straight to business. Alara held up the camera. Everything you wanted. Vault location, photographs of the gold stockpile, ledgers documenting the embezzlement, names of every official involved. How much gold total? I couldn't get an exact count, but based on what I saw and photographed, at least 3 million, possibly closer to 4. A ripple of reaction swept through the room. That was kingdom-changing wealth, war-funding wealth, the kind of money that could buy loyalty across entire regions or destabilize alliances that had held for decades. And the ledgers are detailed enough to prove systematic theft? That was a gray-haired woman Alara didn't recognize, sharp-eyed and deeply skeptical. Names, dates, amounts, transactions. 8 years of theft documented in Roderick's own handwriting in some cases. Alara set the camera on the table carefully. It's all there, every detail you could possibly need. Kael picked up the device, examined it briefly, then looked at Vera. Get this to the archive team immediately. I want every image copied, verified, analyzed, and cross-referenced with Marcus Vance's original documentation. I want to know every connection, every pattern, every weakness we can exploit. Vera took the camera and left at a near run. How did they make you? Kael asked Alara directly. What compromised the mission? I honestly don't know. Alara slumped into the nearest chair, exhaustion hitting her all at once like a physical weight. I was so careful. Played the traumatized survivor perfectly for 2 weeks. Never broke character once, but somehow Roderick knew I was feeding you information. I heard him and Brennan in the vault talking about arresting me for treason and espionage. Could be anything, Matthias said thoughtfully. Someone saw something they shouldn't have. Someone talked who shouldn't have talked. Maybe just Roderick's paranoia finally hitting the right target by pure chance. Doesn't matter how it happened, Kael said firmly. What matters is we have what we needed and she got out alive. That's the only relevant outcome. He looked at Alara directly, and something in his expression softened fractionally. Cole died covering our escape, held off at least a dozen soldiers to buy us maybe 2 minutes. Alara's throat tightened painfully. Without him, we wouldn't have made it 50 yards. Kael nodded slowly, face grave. Cole was a professional. He understood the risks better than anyone and made his choice. We honor that by making sure his sacrifice matters. He turned to address the full room. We move forward immediately. Alara's cover is completely blown, which means Roderick knows we have active intelligence gathering operations. He'll be more cautious now, more paranoid, probably purging anyone he even suspects of disloyalty. But we have the evidence we needed to execute the real plan. Which is what exactly? Asked a scarred man Alara hadn't met. We have proof of embezzlement. Great. What do we do with it? March south and tell everyone their king is a thief? They'll call it frontier propaganda and rally around him. No. Kael's smile was cold and sharp as winter ice. We do something far more effective than that. We turn his own people against him systematically. We make them demand his head, not us. He gestured and Matthias unrolled a new map across the table. This one showed the southern kingdoms in intricate detail. Noble houses, military garrisons, trade centers, all marked and annotated. Roderick's power base relies on 3 critical supports, Kael said, pointing to different locations. The noble houses who provide him legitimacy and resources. The military who enforce his rule through force. And the common people who tolerate him because they don't know any better and fear change. He looked around the room. We systematically destroy all 3 supports. We make them crumble from the inside. How? The gray-haired woman asked. We give them the truth in a form they cannot ignore or dismiss. Kael tapped where the camera had been. These images prove Roderick has been stealing from his own kingdom for years, hoarding massive wealth while villages starve and soldiers go unpaid, enriching himself and his closest allies while everyone else suffers. We make absolutely certain that every noble, every military officer, every merchant and farmer and common person knows exactly what their king has been doing with their money. They won't believe it, someone argued. They'll immediately call it frontier propaganda and lies designed to destabilize the kingdom. They might, Kael agreed easily. If it was just our word against his. But it's not just our word. We have Marcus Vance's original documentation from 8 years ago corroborating everything. We have current ledgers in Roderick's own handwriting. We have testimony from guild officials who were coerced into cooperating. And most importantly, he looked directly at Alara. We have his own subject, the daughter of a man he executed, confirming every single detail from personal investigation. Alara's stomach dropped. What are you saying? You're Marcus Vance's daughter, the supposedly loyal subject who survived an impossible mission and came home traumatized and broken. You're not a frontier agent. You're a southern noble with every reason to be loyal to Roderick if he was actually worth loyalty. Cale's eyes were calculating. You're the perfect witness. Sympathetic, credible, absolutely impossible to dismiss as just another frontier enemy. You want me to publicly testify against him. I want you to tell the absolute truth about what you found, what your father discovered years ago, what Roderick has been systematically doing for nearly a decade. Kyle leaned forward slightly. Your testimony gives legitimacy to everything else, makes it impossible for him to write this off as foreign interference or enemy propaganda. He'll call me a traitor immediately. He'll say I was compromised by the frontier, corrupted, that I'm lying to save my own skin from justified punishment. Let him try that strategy. Kale's voice was utterly confident. You're a wolfless girl who barely survived a diplomatic mission he sent you on expecting you to die. The sympathy is entirely on your side before you even open your mouth. And when people hear your full story, when they hear how he sent you to die, how you discovered his crimes, how he tried to have you arrested for treason rather than answer for what he'd done, they'll believe you. Because your story makes sense in a way his denials won't. The gray-haired woman spoke up again. This strategy is extremely risky. If it backfires, somehow we strengthen his position instead of weakening it, give him a rallying point. Everything worth doing carries risk, Kyle said flatly. But the alternative is open warfare, which kills thousands of people who don't deserve it and accomplishes nothing except making us look like aggressors, justifying everything Southerners believe about the savage frontier. He straightened. No. We do this intelligently. We use truth as our primary weapon, and we make Roderick destroy himself through his own corruption and lies. The room fell into heavy silence. Alara could feel absolutely everyone's eyes on her, waiting for her response to what Kyle was proposing. She thought about her father hanging from the north gate while crowds threw stones and shouted for his blood. Thought about 6 years of being a ghost that nobody saw or cared about. Thought about Cole dying in the dark to buy her 2 minutes of escape time. I'll do it, she said clearly. I'll testify publicly. I'll tell them everything I know, everything I found, everything my father documented. All of it. Kale nodded once, satisfied. Then we start planning immediately. Matthias, I want secure communication channels open to every major noble house in the southern kingdoms. Neutral ones, suspicious ones, even some of Roderick's supporters. We're going to invite them to hear evidence regarding their king's conduct. Make it formal, official, impossible for them to ignore without looking complicit. That'll take at least 2 weeks to properly arrange, Matthias said. Then we start this afternoon and work around the clock if necessary. Kale looked around the room. This is how we actually win. Not through superior military force, but through superior truth deployed strategically. We show them exactly what Roderick really is behind all the pageantry and propaganda. Then we step back and let them tear him down themselves. The meeting continued for hours, people arguing details and strategic approaches. Alara participated where she could, answering endless questions about Southern court structure, which nobles could potentially be trusted, which would resist regardless of evidence, where the military's true loyalties lay. Finally, as the sun was setting and people were getting genuinely exhausted, Kale dismissed everyone except Alara and Matthias. You did exceptionally well, Kale said simply. The mission was compromised, but you adapted under pressure, got the critical evidence, and got yourself out alive. That's literally all that mattered. Cole died making that possible. Cole died doing exactly what he was trained to do, what he chose to do. Kale's voice was gentle, but absolutely firm. He was a professional who understood the risks better than anyone in this fortress. Don't dishonor his choice by drowning yourself in guilt over it. He'd be furious with you. Alara nodded, not quite trusting her voice. Get actual rest, Kyle continued. Tomorrow we start preparing your testimony. It needs to be absolutely perfect, detailed enough to be thoroughly credible, emotional enough to be genuinely compelling, but controlled enough that Roderick can't dismiss it as feminine hysteria or trauma-induced delusion. I understand. I know you do. That's why this will work. She made it back to her quarters on autopilot, collapsed onto the bed still wearing filthy travel clothes, slept for 12 straight hours and woke to find clean clothes laid out and food waiting on the desk. The next 3 weeks were the most intensive preparation of Alara's entire life. Kale drilled her personally on the testimony, spending hours each day on it. Not just what to say, but precisely how to say it. When to show genuine emotion and when to stay absolutely calm and factual. How to answer hostile questions without getting defensive or angry. They'll try extremely hard to rattle you, he said during one brutal practice session. They'll call you a liar, a traitor, a frontier agent, a corrupted woman. They'll bring up your father's execution and suggest that corruption and disloyalty run in your blood. You absolutely cannot let them see you break under that pressure. What if I do break? Then you pause deliberately, take a visible breath, and remember exactly why you're doing this. Kale's eyes were serious. You're not there for yourself or your own vindication. You're there for your father who died trying to expose this. For every person Roderick has systematically robbed and betrayed. For the truth that deserves to be heard regardless of consequences. Let that anchor you when they attack. Vera worked extensively on appearance and presentation. You need to look credible but not threatening in any way. Sympathetic but not weak or pathetic. We're walking an extremely narrow line here between multiple bad outcomes. Matthias handled all security planning with obsessive detail. We're sending you into a room full of southern nobles, many of whom have excellent reasons to want you dead. The security has to be absolutely perfect, or this becomes an assassination instead of a testimony session. And through it all, Alara studied the evidence until she could recite details in her sleep. Every transaction, every name, every date, every pattern of Roderick's systematic theft. Her father's original documentation plus her new evidence created a picture that seemed impossible to deny if presented properly. Finally, word came back through the covert channels. The invitations had been sent and, surprisingly, mostly accepted. 15 major noble houses, representing the genuine core of Southern political power, had agreed to attend a neutral hearing of evidence regarding allegations of royal misconduct. It would be held in the ancient council chambers at the border fortress, technically neutral ground, heavily secured, witnessed by representatives from multiple neighboring kingdoms to ensure legitimacy. They're coming because they're genuinely curious, Vera explained. Some because they already suspect Roderick of exactly this kind of thing. Some because they want to see the frontier make complete fools of themselves and destroy our credibility. Either way, they'll be physically present and they'll hear everything. The night before they were scheduled to leave for the border fortress, Kael came to Alara's quarters unannounced. Last chance to back out, he said without any preamble. Once we walk into that chamber tomorrow, there's absolutely no retreating. You testify completely or you look like a coward and we lose everything we've built. I'm not backing out. Good. He handed her a small wooden case she recognized. Your father's original journal. I want you to have it physically with you when you testify. Let them see it, touch it if they want. Physical evidence makes it real in a way photographs never quite can. Alara took the case with both hands, held it like the precious thing it was. Thank you for this. Don't thank me yet. We haven't actually won anything. But there was something almost like warmth in his usually cold voice. Get whatever sleep you can manage. Tomorrow we change absolutely everything, one way or another. He left her alone with her father's journal and the crushing weight of what was coming. The journey to the border fortress took 2 full days of hard riding. They traveled with a substantial escort, 30 warriors, all heavily armed, all watching constantly for threats. Vera rode beside Alara most of the way, offering quiet encouragement. You're going to do fine, she said. You know this material better than anyone alive. You didn't just study it, you lived it. Just tell them the truth clearly and let the evidence speak for itself. What if they simply don't believe me regardless of evidence? Some won't, no matter what you say or show them. That's their choice and their problem. Vera glanced at her. But some will believe. And those some represent enough power to crack Roderick's entire foundation. That's literally all we need. Not total victory, just enough doubt planted to make his support structure crumble. They arrived at the border fortress just as the sun was setting. The building was genuinely ancient, neutral ground maintained by treaty specifically for sensitive negotiations. Representatives from the noble houses were already arriving in groups, their guards and advisors filling the courtyard, eyeing each other with varying levels of suspicion. Elara recognized some faces from Roderick's court. Others were complete strangers. All of them looked at her with suspicion, curiosity, hostility, or some combination thereof. "The wolfless girl who went to the frontier and came back a traitor," someone muttered, loud enough to clearly be heard. Elara kept her head high and didn't respond to obvious bait. They were shown to secure quarters. The actual testimony would happen tomorrow morning, giving everyone time to settle in and prepare properly. Elara spent the evening reviewing her notes one final time, though she had everything thoroughly memorized. Sleep was absolutely impossible. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, trying desperately to quiet the screaming in her head. Finally, dawn came with pale gray light. Matthias collected her personally. "Ready?" "Absolutely not. But let's do it anyway." The council chamber was enormous, built centuries ago to hold hundreds. Today it held maybe 70 people, the noble representatives, their key advisors, neutral witnesses from neighboring kingdoms, and security forces from all sides maintaining careful watch. At the front of the room sat a single chair facing the assembled crowd. For her, Elara walked down the center aisle with Kael on one side and Matthias on the other. Every single eye in the room tracked her movement. She could hear whispers, see the sneers on some faces, feel the contempt rolling off certain groups in almost physical waves. She sat in the chair and looked out at the faces that would decide her father's legacy and Roderick's ultimate fate. The neutral arbiter, a distinguished white-haired magistrate from a neighboring kingdom with a reputation for fairness, stood to formally address the room. "We are gathered here to examine evidence regarding serious allegations of systematic corruption and embezzlement by King Roderick of the Southern Realm. The primary witness is Lady Elara Vance, daughter of the late Lord Marcus Vance. She will present testimony and evidence for your careful consideration. You may question her, but you will do so with respect and proper order, or you will be removed." He looked directly at Elara. "Lady Vance, you may begin when ready." Elara stood slowly, took a deliberate breath, let herself remember her father's face as they led him to the gallows. Cole's sacrifice in the dark, 6 years of being nothing, and started talking in a clear, steady voice. 8 years ago, my father discovered that King Roderick was systematically stealing from the kingdom's treasury. He documented it carefully and extensively. Every suspicious transaction, every falsified record, every official who was either paid off or threatened into silence. He built a comprehensive case, proving that the king had personally embezzled millions in gold while villages throughout the realm starved and soldiers went unpaid for their service. She paused deliberately, let that sink in. Roderick had my father executed for treason before he could present this evidence to anyone with the power to act on it. Seized our family lands, destroyed our house completely, and kept me alive as a living reminder of what happens to people who threaten him with truth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some angry, some skeptical, some thoughtful. 3 weeks ago, I was sent to the Obsidian Frontier on what was presented as a diplomatic mission, but was actually a carefully planned assassination attempt using tribute laced with wolfsbane poison. I survived that mission, and while I was recovering in frontier territory, I learned that my father's original documentation still existed. When I returned to the capital, I continued his investigation quietly, and I found absolute proof that Roderick's crimes have only grown far worse. She opened the case with steady hands, held up her father's journal for everyone to see. "This is my father's original evidence. Names, dates, amounts, witnesses he interviewed, and this," she gestured to where Vera was efficiently setting up a display of the vault photographs on boards, "is what I personally found and documented 3 weeks ago in a hidden vault beneath the old fortress. 4 million in gold minimum. Stolen systematically from the kingdom over years, hidden from the people. Hoarded by a king who cares only for his own wealth and power and security." The room absolutely erupted into noise. Nobles shouting questions, demanding to see evidence, calling her a liar, and worse. The magistrate had to call for order 3 separate times, voice getting progressively sharper. "I know exactly what you're thinking," Elara said when they finally quieted enough. "That I'm compromised. That the frontier turned me into a traitor. that this is all fabricated to justify their eventual aggression against the South. She looked directly at Lord Hastings, one of Roderick's strongest and most vocal supporters. So I formally invite you to verify it all yourselves. Send your own people to examine the vault personally. Review the ledgers with your own accountants. Interview the guild officials named in my father's documentation. Don't take my word for anything. Don't take the Frontier's word. Investigate independently with your own trusted people and see exactly what you find. That created another massive wave of noise and argument, because she just called their bluff perfectly. If they refused to investigate, it looked like they were actively protecting Roderick. If they investigated and somehow found nothing, they could dismiss everything easily. But if they investigated with their own people and found exactly what she claimed, then Roderick was finished. The magistrate called for a formal recess. The nobles immediately broke into intense arguing groups. Elara sat very still, trying to read the room, trying to gauge reactions. Kyle appeared at her elbow. Extremely well done. You gave them exactly what they needed. Explicit permission to doubt Roderick, without looking disloyal or treasonous themselves. Will it actually work? We're about to find out. The recess lasted nearly 3 hours. When they finally reconvened, the magistrate looked genuinely grave. The assembled houses have agreed to send an independent investigation team to verify Lady Vance's specific claims. They will examine the vault in question, review all available documentation, and interview relevant parties under oath. Until their investigation reaches conclusions, these proceedings are formally suspended. It wasn't complete victory, but it was absolutely enough. As they filed out, several nobles approached Elara quietly, some to thank her for her courage, some to apologize for doubting her father years ago, some to whisper that they'd suspected Roderick of exactly this for years, but had lacked proof. One elderly duke gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Your father was a genuinely good man," he said quietly. "I'm deeply sorry we failed him when it mattered. We won't fail you." Outside, as they prepared to return to the frontier, Vera was actually smiling. "You did it perfectly. You planted the doubt. Now it'll spread like disease through Roderick's entire support network." Elara looked back at the fortress, at the nobles still arguing in intense groups. "Cole should have lived to see this. Cole knew this would work," Vera said gently. "That's exactly why he gave his life, to make sure you escaped with that evidence. Don't waste his sacrifice drowning in guilt. Honor it by finishing what we started together." As they rode back toward the frontier, Elara felt something she genuinely hadn't felt in 6 years. Hope, not the naive hope of a child who believed justice would automatically prevail, but the hard, sharp, realistic hope of someone who'd seen how power really worked and had just used those exact mechanisms to strike back effectively. Roderick wasn't defeated yet, wasn't even truly damaged yet, but for the first time in 8 years, he was genuinely vulnerable. And Elara had just handed his enemies the weapon that would ultimately destroy him. The investigation took 6 weeks that felt like 6 years. Elara stayed in the frontier, watching reports filter in through Vera's intelligence network. The Noble Coalition had sent a team of 20 investigators, accountants, military officers, independent magistrates, people with reputations to protect, people who couldn't be easily bought or threatened. They'd found the vault exactly where Elara said it would be, found the gold exactly as she'd described it, found ledgers that matched her father's documentation with sickening precision, and they'd found more. Secret accounts in 3 foreign kingdoms, property seized through fabricated debts, entire villages taxed into starvation while the proceeds disappeared into Roderick's private coffers. The corruption went deeper than even Marcus Vance had documented, deeper than Elara had imagined. "It's perfect," Vera said, reviewing the preliminary report. "They can't ignore this. They can't spin it. The evidence is too overwhelming." "Roderick won't go quietly," Elara said. "No, he won't." Word came on the morning of the 43rd day. The investigation team had completed their work and requested a formal assembly to present findings. All major houses were required to attend, including representatives from the Obsidian frontier, and Roderick himself had been summoned to answer the charges. "This is it," Kyle said, reading the summons. "This is where everything ends or everything falls apart." They left for the border fortress the next morning with an escort of 50 warriors. This time it wasn't just protection, it was a statement. The frontier was coming in force, ready for whatever happened next. The fortress was already packed when they arrived. Every major house had sent representatives, many bringing small armies of their own. The courtyard looked like the preparation for war, guards eyeing each other with open hostility, hands never far from weapons. Roderick's banner flew over one wing of the fortress. He'd come with 200 soldiers and half his court, turning his attendance into a show of strength. Alara saw him from across the courtyard, saw him see her. His face twisted with rage so pure it was almost beautiful. "He's going to try to have you killed," Matthias said quietly. "Probably today. Definitely before this is over." "I know." "Good. Stay close to us. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't trust anyone who isn't Frontier." The assembly was called for midday. The council chamber was packed beyond capacity, people standing along the walls when the seats ran out. The magistrate who'd overseen the original testimony sat at the head table, flanked by the lead investigators. Roderick sat opposite, surrounded by his advisors, looking like a king preparing to crush an insurrection. Alara sat with the Frontier delegation, Kael on one side, Matthias on the other. The magistrate stood. The room fell silent. "We are here to present findings from the independent investigation into allegations of systematic corruption by King Roderick. The evidence gathered has been reviewed by all parties. What follows is a formal presentation of conclusions." He nodded to the lead investigator, a stern woman named Magistrate Thorne. She stood, opened a thick folder, and began reading in a voice that carried to every corner. Over the course of 6 weeks, this investigative team examined financial records, interviewed witnesses under oath, and physically verified claims made by Lady Alara Vance. Our findings are as follows. She paused, looked directly at Roderick. "King Roderick has systematically embezzled approximately 4.2 million in gold from the kingdom's treasury over the past 8 years. This theft was accomplished through falsified mining reports, inflated military expenditures, and fabricated infrastructure projects. The stolen wealth was hidden in a vault beneath the old fortress and in foreign accounts across 3 kingdoms." The room erupted. Nobles shouting, guards reaching for weapons, chaos spreading like wildfire. "Furthermore," Thorne continued, her voice cutting through the noise, "we found evidence of land seizures based on fabricated debts, judicial executions to silence witnesses, and bribery of officials at every level of government. The scale of corruption is unprecedented in the recorded history of this realm." Roderick stood, face purple with rage. "This is a farce, Frontier propaganda designed to—" "Your Majesty," Thorne interrupted coldly, "we have ledgers in your own handwriting. We have testimony from 37 witnesses. We have physical evidence that cannot be disputed. Unless you're claiming you didn't write these documents," she held up a ledger, "the evidence is conclusive. Those documents are forgeries. This entire investigation is compromised by Frontier interference." "Then explain the gold," Thorne said flatly. "Explain the 4.2 million we found exactly where Lady Vance said it would be. Explain the foreign accounts in your name. Explain the seized properties that now belong to your personal holdings." Roderick had no answer. For the first time in his reign, he had absolutely no answer. "This is treason," he finally sputtered. "You're all committing treason by even entertaining these lies." "No, Your Majesty." That was Duke Ashford, the elderly noble who'd gripped Alara's hand weeks ago. He stood slowly, supported by a cane. "What you did was treason, theft from your own people, murder of those who tried to stop you. You betrayed every oath you took when you claimed that crown." Other nobles were standing now. Not all of them. Some still looked uncertain, some still loyal to Roderick. But enough. More than enough. "The evidence is clear," Ashford continued. "The only question remaining is what we do about it." "You do nothing," Roderick snarled. "I am your king. Your rightful—" "You are a thief and a murderer," Ashford said calmly. "And under the ancient laws of this realm, when a king betrays his people, the people have the right to withdraw their loyalty." Roderick's hand went to his sword. His guards moved forward, and that's when everything went to hell. One of Roderick's guards drew his blade. Someone on the noble side responded. Steel rang against steel, and suddenly the entire chamber was erupting into violence. "Get her out!" Kael shouted, shoving Alara toward the exit. But Roderick had seen her, was pushing through the chaos directly toward her, sword drawn, murder in his eyes. "You!" he roared. "You did this! You destroyed everything!" Alara stumbled backward. Matthias stepped between them, blade out. "Through me first," Matthias said quietly. Roderick swung. Matthias parried, the impact ringing through the chamber. They traded blows, fast and brutal, while chaos raged around them. Kale was fighting 3 of Roderick's guards simultaneously, moving like violence given form. Other frontier warriors had engaged, protecting the retreat. "Alara, move!" Vera grabbed her arm, hauling her toward a side exit. They made it 10 feet before Brennan appeared, blocking the way. "Treasonous little bitch," he said, raising his sword. Vera's knife took him in the throat before he could swing. He went down gurgling. They crashed through the door into a corridor. Behind them, the sounds of fighting intensified. Screams, steel, the wet sounds of people dying. "We need to get to the horses," Vera said, pulling Alara through passages at a run. They burst into the courtyard to find it already a battlefield. Roderick's forces were fighting everyone. Nobles who'd turned against him, frontier warriors, even some of his own soldiers who'd apparently had enough. "There," Vera pointed to where their horses were tied. They ran, made it halfway before soldiers spotted them. "The Vance girl, take her alive!" 4 soldiers converged. Vera engaged 2 immediately, her blades singing. Alara grabbed a fallen sword, barely got it up in time to block a strike that would have split her skull. She had no training for this, no real skill. But she had rage and fear and desperation, and apparently that was enough. She blocked another strike, stumbled, stabbed wildly, felt the blade hit something solid. The soldier screamed and fell. The second soldier hesitated. That hesitation cost him his life as Iris appeared from nowhere and put an arrow through his eye. "Move!" Iris shouted. They reached the horses. Mounted in a chaos of movement, kicked into motion just as more soldiers arrived. An arrow whistled past Alara's head. Another hit her saddle. She bent low and rode hard, following Vera through the gate, into open ground, running for safety that seemed impossibly far away. Behind them, the fortress was tearing itself apart. She could hear the fighting even at a distance, could see smoke starting to rise. They didn't slow until they were 5 miles clear, until the fortress was just a dark shape behind them. "What about Kael?" Alara gasped. "Matthias? The others?" "They can handle themselves," Vera said, but her voice was tight. "Right now we get you to safety. That's the priority." They rode hard for another hour before Vera finally allowed them to stop, to rest the horses and catch their breath. "That went worse than planned," Iris said with massive understatement. "But better than it could have," Vera countered. "Roderick's exposed now, completely. Even if he kills everyone in that fortress, the truth is out. The investigation results were witnessed by dozens of houses. They can't bury this." "What happens now?" Alara asked. "Now?" Vera smiled grimly. "Now we watch Roderick's kingdom tear itself apart, because half those nobles are going to demand his abdication. The other half might still support him out of fear or profit. Either way, the South is heading for civil war." The thought should have been satisfying. Instead, it just felt heavy. They made it back to the frontier fortress 3 days later. Kael and Matthias were already there, along with most of the warriors they'd brought. Some injured, 2 dead, but most intact. "You made it," Kael said when he saw Alara, and there was actual relief in his voice. "So did you." "Barely. Roderick tried to kill everyone who'd heard the evidence. Probably succeeded with a few." Kael's face was grim. "But the investigators escaped. The magistrate escaped. Enough nobles escaped. The truth is spreading like fire through dry grass." Over the next 2 weeks, reports flooded in. The Southern Kingdom was fracturing. Duke Ashford had declared Roderick unfit to rule and called for his abdication. 8 other major houses had joined him. Roderick had responded by declaring them all traitors and marching his army to enforce loyalty. But his army was fragmenting too. Officers who'd been named in the ledgers, soldiers who hadn't been paid in months. Entire units deserting when they learned what their king had really been doing with the kingdom's wealth. "It's collapsing faster than I expected," Vera said, studying the latest intelligence. "Roderick's lost control. He's down to maybe a third of his original support, and that's shrinking daily." "Will they ask for frontier intervention?" Matthias asked Kael. "They already have. Duke Ashford sent a formal request yesterday." Kael held up the letter. "Asking us to support the coalition against Roderick's forces, promising trade agreements, territorial concessions, formal alliance. Are you going to accept? No. Kael set the letter down. This is their fight now. Their kingdom, their king, their corruption to root out. We gave them the truth. What they do with it is their choice. Word came on the 63rd day after the investigation results were presented. Roderick's own guard had turned on him. He'd been trying to flee the capital with the gold he could carry when his personal guards, men he'd trusted for years, had stopped him, arrested him, turned him over to Duke Ashford's coalition. They're going to try him, Vera said, reading the report. Formal trial for treason, embezzlement, murder. They're asking if you want to attend. Alara's hands were shaking. Do they want me to testify again? They want you there as a witness. You and Kael both, as representatives of the frontier. Vera looked at her carefully. You don't have to go. You've done enough. But Alara was already standing. When? 3 days. They traveled light this time. Just Alara, Kael, Vera, and a small escort. The trial was being held in the capital itself, in the same throne room where Roderick had sentenced Alara to death months ago. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The room was packed with nobles, commoners, soldiers, everyone who could fit. Roderick sat in chains where supplicants usually knelt. His crown was gone, his fine robes replaced with prisoner's gray. He looked small, diminished, nothing like the king who'd ruled through fear and cruelty. Duke Ashford presided as chief magistrate. He read the charges in a voice that carried through the massive space. Embezzlement, treason, murder. The list went on and on. How do you answer these charges? Ashford asked. Roderick said nothing, just stared at the floor. Your Majesty, you must answer. I am not your Majesty anymore, apparently. Roderick's voice was bitter. So why does it matter what I say? You've already decided. The frontier bitch and her lies have poisoned you all. Every eye turned to Alara. She stood slowly, walked forward until she was directly in front of Roderick. Look at me, she said quietly. He didn't. Look at me. Roderick's eyes rose slowly to meet hers. My father was a good man, Alara said. He tried to stop you through proper channels, through law, through the system he believed in. You killed him for it, destroyed my family, kept me alive as a reminder of your power. Your father was a traitor. My father was right. Alara's voice was steady as stone. About everything. Every crime he documented, you committed. Every theft he recorded, you made. And when I proved it, when I brought evidence even you couldn't deny, you tried to have me killed rather than answer for what you'd done. She leaned closer. You sent me to die in the frontier. Instead, I found people who valued truth over comfort, justice over power, who helped me finish what my father started. She straightened. You didn't just fail to kill me. You created the person who destroyed you. Silence filled the throne room. I have nothing more to say to you, Alara said. You're not worth more words. She turned and walked back to her seat, leaving Roderick chained and diminished behind her. The trial lasted 3 days. Witness after witness testified to Roderick's crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. On the 3rd day, Duke Ashford read the verdict. Guilty on all charges. The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out at dawn tomorrow at the North Gate. The same gate where Marcus Vance had died. Alara didn't watch the execution, couldn't bring herself to. She stayed in her quarters while it happened, staring out the window, trying to feel something other than emptiness. Vera found her there afterward. It's done, Vera said simply. Roderick is dead. Alara nodded, felt tears on her face and was surprised by them. I thought I'd feel different. Satisfied. Victorious. Revenge rarely feels like people think it will, Vera said gently. It's not sweet. It's just necessary sometimes. My father is still dead. Cole is still dead. All those people Roderick destroyed are still destroyed. But he can't hurt anyone else. And the truth is out there now. People know what he did, what your father tried to stop. Vera sat beside her. That matters. Maybe more than the revenge. The Southern Kingdom reformed itself slowly over the following months. Duke Ashford became regent, overseeing the transition to a new system of governance. The stolen gold was recovered and distributed back to the provinces that had been robbed. Marcus Vance was formally exonerated, his name cleared, his reputation restored. and Alara was offered a choice. They want you to return, Kyle said, showing her the letter. Full restoration of your family's lands and titles. A seat on the new council. Recognition for exposing Roderick's corruption. What do you want? Alara asked. I want you to choose what makes you happy, Kyle said. If that's returning south, reclaiming your heritage, rebuilding your family, do it. If it's staying here, he paused. I'd be glad if you stayed. Alara looked around the fortress that had become home. Thought about the people who'd risked everything to help her. Thought about the frontier that had seemed like hell and turned out to be salvation. I'm staying, she said. The South has enough leaders. They don't need me. But here, she smiled. Here I'm useful. Here I matter. Here I found people who see me instead of looking through me. Kale's answering smile was rare and genuine. Good, because I'm making you my chief advisor on Southern affairs. Someone needs to manage all these new trade agreements, and you're the only one who understands how Southern politics actually works. Is that an official position? It is now. Life in the frontier wasn't easy, wasn't comfortable. The winters were brutal, the politics complex, the work demanding. But Alara threw herself into it with everything she had. She negotiated treaties, managed trade disputes, helped refugees from the southern conflicts find homes in the north, built bridges between worlds that had hated each other for generations. And slowly, carefully, she built something she'd never had before, a life that was actually hers. 1 year after Roderick's execution, Alara stood at the fortress walls watching the sun set over the frontier. Kale joined her, silent for a long moment. Any regrets? He asked finally. Alara thought about it, about her father, about the years of being invisible, about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. No, she said honestly. I regret what happened to my father. I regret the people who died, but I don't regret the choices I made. Don't regret becoming who I am now. Who are you now? She smiled. Someone who matters. Someone who fought back and won. Someone who turned weakness into strength and used it to tear down a king. She looked at Kyle. Someone free. Freedom looks good on you. It feels good too. They stood together in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the mountains. Below, the fortress came alive with lights and voices. People going about their lives, building something better than what had come before. Alara had been sent here to die. Had been a pawn no one chose, a sacrifice no one mourned. Instead, she'd survived, adapted, become something far more dangerous than anyone expected. She'd become the truth that couldn't be silenced, the witness that couldn't be dismissed, the voice that spoke for everyone who'd been crushed and forgotten and told they didn't matter. And in becoming that, she'd helped destroy a corrupt king and free a kingdom from tyranny. Not bad for a wolfless girl everyone had written off as worthless. The frontier wind was cold against her face, sharp and clean and real. Alara breathed it in deep and felt something settle in her chest. Something that might have been peace, might have been satisfaction, might have just been the simple knowledge that she'd done what she set out to do. She'd made Roderick pay, made him answer for every crime, made him fall the way her father should have made him fall years ago. And she'd done it not through violence or power, but through the patient, relentless deployment of truth. Thank you, she said quietly to Kyle, for giving me the chance to finish this, for trusting me when you had no reason to. You earned that trust. Kale's voice was soft. Everything that happened, you made happen. I just gave you the tools and the platform. You did the rest. We did the rest, Alara corrected. Cole, Vera, Matthias, you, all of you. This wasn't just me. No, but you were the catalyst. You were the one willing to walk back into hell to get the evidence. Willing to stand in that chamber and testify knowing half the people there wanted you dead. That took something special. It took desperation, Alara said honestly, and anger and stubbornness. I'm not special. I was just tired of losing. Sometimes that's enough. Somewhere in the fortress, someone was playing music. A northern tune Alara had learned over the months, haunting and beautiful. People were singing along, voices rising into the night. Do you ever think about what your father would say? Kyle asked. If he could see you now? Alara's throat tightened. Every day. What do you think he'd say? She thought about Marcus Vance, about his careful documentation and his belief in systems and justice, about how he'd died trying to do the right thing the right way. "I think he'd be proud," she said finally, "but also probably terrified by some of the risks I took. He was careful, methodical. I was effective," Kael finished. "You were effective. That's what matters." "Is it?" People died. Cole and others. The South descended into civil war. Thousands died in the fighting. Thousands were already dying under Roderick's rule. Starvation, oppression, violence. You didn't cause that suffering. You exposed it and gave people the chance to fight back. Kael looked at her seriously. "Don't carry guilt for consequences that aren't yours to own." Easier said than done. Most things worth doing are. The music below was getting louder, more people joining in. It sounded like celebration, like people who'd survived something difficult and come out the other side still standing. "Come on," Kael said, turning toward the stairs. "You should be down there. These people respect you, trust you. You're part of this now, not an outsider looking in." Elara followed him down into the warmth and light and noise. People smiled when they saw her, called greetings, made room for her by the fire like she belonged, because she did belong. For the first time in her life, she genuinely belonged somewhere. She'd been the rejected mate, the pawn no one chose, the wolfless disgrace sent to die in frozen hell. Now she was something else entirely. She was Elara Vance, chief advisor to the Obsidian Pack, daughter of Marcus Vance, whose name was being restored to honor across the South, the woman who brought down a corrupt king through patience and truth and absolute refusal to quit. She was exactly who she'd chosen to become, and that made all the difference. The night wore on with music and stories and laughter. Elara sat among people who'd become family, in a place that had become home, and let herself finally feel the victory she'd fought so hard to achieve. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she first crossed those cairns into the frontier. It was better, more real, more earned. Because the truth was, nobody chose her to be anything. Nobody handed her power or position or purpose. She'd claimed all of it herself through blood and sweat and absolute refusal to be the worthless ghost Roderick wanted her to be. She'd rejected the role they'd assigned her and written her own story instead. And that story had changed everything.